For months, the silver-haired man sat under the flickering gate monitor, watching me scrub scuff marks off the linoleum. I assumed he was just another lonely traveler, or maybe a creep. I was wrong. He was actually the key to a 9-figure fortune stolen in my name. The only witness who knew I was never supposed to be this invisible. My name is Stella Henderson, and I have spent the last 29 years learning how to disappear while standing in the middle of a room. It is a specific skill, like mixing the perfect ratio of bleach to water, or knowing exactly how much pressure to apply to a floor buffer so it hums instead of screams. You have to flatten your energy, lower your chin, and become part of the architecture. You have to make yourself less interesting than a flight schedule or a vending machine. If you do it right, people do not just ignore you. Their eyes actually slide over you, like you are a pane of glass or a beige wall. I am very good at it. Tonight, like every night for the past 5 years, I was pushing a rattling yellow custodial cart through the cavernous belly of Brindle Cross International Airport. The wheels had a rhythmic, annoying squeak that echoed off the polished terrazzo floors, a sound that should have drawn attention but never did. It was the graveyard shift, the stretch of time between midnight and 4 in the morning when the airport feels less like a transit hub and more like a purgatory with better lighting. The air always smelled the same here, a sterile cocktail of industrial lemon cleaner, stale coffee, and the faint, metallic tang of jet fuel seeping in from the tarmac. I paused to wipe a smudge off a chrome railing. A group of business travelers in wrinkled suits rushed past me, arguing about a missed connection. One of them nearly clipped my shoulder with his roller bag. He did not apologize. He did not even look back. To him, I was just an obstacle, a traffic cone in a navy blue uniform with a name tag that might as well have been blank. That was fine. I preferred the invisibility. It was safer than being seen. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the runway lights blurred in the freezing rain. This was Ashford, Illinois, a town that clings to the map like a rusted barnacle. Ashford smells like diesel and wet concrete in the summer and freezes into a gray, hopeless block of ice in the winter. It is the kind of place where dreams are not things you chase. They are things you trade in for overtime pay. People here grow up knowing the ceiling is low. You keep your head down. You pay your bills, and you do not ask for more than you can hold in your 2 hands. I continued down Concourse D, the squeak of my cart keeping time with the dull throb of a headache behind my eyes. I was tired. Not the kind of tired that a nap fixes, but the deep, bone-heavy exhaustion of carrying things that are too heavy for you for too long. My lower back ached, and my hands were dry and cracked from the harsh soap we used to scrub the sinks. As I approached gate D14, my stomach gave a little lurch. I did not need to look up to know he would be there. For the past 3 months, every single time I worked a shift. He was there, an older man, maybe in his early 70s, sitting in the exact same seat under the flickering gate monitor. He did not look like the other passengers. He did not wear sweatpants or hoodies. He wore a charcoal wool overcoat that looked softer than my bedsheets, a silk scarf, and polished leather shoes that probably cost more than my car. His hair was silver and swept back, neat and precise. He never had a suitcase, just a slim leather briefcase resting on his knees. And he watched. Tonight was no different. There he was, a statue of calm amidst the scattered, sleeping passengers sprawled across the vinyl seats. He was reading a newspaper, but as I pushed my cart past, he lowered the paper just an inch. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and focused entirely on me. He did not smile. He did not nod. He just watched me mop the floor with a detached intensity, as if my technique with a wet mop was the most fascinating thing in the terminal. The other custodians had noticed him too. "There goes your wealthy stalker, Stella," one of the younger guys, Marcus, had joked in the break room last week. "Maybe he wants to whisk you away on a private jet." I had laughed it off, shaking my head. He is probably just an insomniac businessman who fights with his wife and does not want to go home. I had said, or he is waiting for a flight that never comes. People are weird. But it did not feel weird. It felt deliberate. I moved past him, keeping my eyes on the floor, scrubbing a non-existent scuff mark just to look busy. I could feel his gaze on the back of my neck, a physical weight. Why was he here? Why did he arrive exactly 15 minutes after I punched in and leave exactly 10 minutes before I punched out? It was like he was punching a time clock of his own, but his job was simply to witness mine. I pushed the thought away. I did not have the bandwidth for mysteries. My life was a simple equation of income versus expenses, and the expenses were always winning. My mind drifted, as it often did during the long, silent hours, to the house on Cedar Lane. I thought about the stack of bills sitting on the kitchen counter, the ones my mother, Diane, pretended not to see. I thought about my stepfather, Hank, sitting in his recliner, complaining about his back and the cost of his prescriptions, waiting for me to fix the leaking sink because calling a plumber cost $150 we did not have. And then there was Jenna. My sister Jenna was 21, golden-haired, bright-eyed, and the center of our family's universe. She was everything I was not. She was the potential at family dinners. The air was always thick with talk of Jenna's internships, Jenna's scholarships, Jenna's bright future. Jenna is going to be someone, my mother would say, beaming, piling an extra helping of mashed potatoes onto Jenna's plate. She is going to get out of Ashford. That is nice, I would say, pushing peas around my plate. Oh, Stella, did you hear? Mom would add, almost as an afterthought. Jenna needs new tires for the winter. It is dangerous for her to drive to campus on those bald treads. She would not ask. She never asked. She would just let the statement hang there, heavy and expectant, until I sighed and said, I will pick up an extra shift. I will take care of it. Last week, I had told them I was promoted to lead custodian. It came with a 50-cent raise and a new badge. That is nice, honey, Mom had said, without looking up from her phone. Hey, Hank, did you see Jenna's post? She got an A on her sociology midterm. I was the scaffolding. That was the word I used when I talked to myself in the mirror. I was the ugly, utilitarian structure that held everything else up. No one takes pictures of the scaffolding. No one applauds the steel beams. They look at the beautiful building, the shining facade. Jenna was the building. I was just the support that kept her from collapsing into the mud of Ashford. It had not always been the plan. 10 years ago, I had dreams too. I had enrolled in community college, studying supply chain management. I liked the logic of it, the way goods moved from point A to point B, the order, the efficiency. I was good at it. But then Hank hurt his back and lost his job at the plant. Then the medical bills started piling up like snowdrifts against the door. Then Jenna needed tuition for her first semester, and housing, and books. I dropped out. It was not a dramatic decision. It was just math. Someone had to pay for the lights. Someone had to buy the groceries. So I traded my textbooks for a mop bucket, and I told myself it was temporary. Temporary turned into a decade. I turned my cart toward the women's restroom near Gate D14. As I walked, I thought about the mantelpiece in our living room. There was a single photo there, framed in fake silver. It was a picture of my mother when she was young, sitting in a chair with baby Jenna on her lap. Hank stood behind them, looking proud. It was a perfect family portrait, except for one glaring detail that only I seemed to see. To the left of my mother, there was a strip of empty background. The composition was off. The way she was sitting, the way her arm was angled. It looked like she should have been holding another child. It looked like someone had been cropped out, or like there was a ghost sitting next to her. I was that ghost. There were no baby pictures of me on the walls, no records of my first steps or my first birthday. When I was 12, I had asked about it. Mom, where are Grandma and Grandpa? Why don't we have any pictures of them? Diane's face had shut down instantly. It was like a steel shutter slamming over a window. Her eyes went cold and hard. We don't have grandparents. Stella, they are dead to us. End of story. That was the house rule. We did not ask about the past. We did not ask where the money came from, or why we never had enough of it, or why my birth certificate said father unknown. We just survived. I reached the restroom and propped the heavy door open with the rubber stopper on my cart. I pulled on a fresh pair of yellow rubber gloves, the snap of the latex loud in the quiet corridor. I grabbed the toilet brush and the disinfectant. This was the job. This was the reality. I went into the handicap stall at the end of the row. It was a mess. Someone had missed the bowl. I sighed, feeling that familiar cocktail of resignation and mild disgust. I bent down, scrubbing the porcelain, the fumes of the bleach stinging my nose. Just scaffolding, I whispered to myself, just keeping the structure standing. I was on my knees, wiping the rim, when the feeling hit me. It was a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the primal instinct that tells a prey animal a predator has entered the clearing. The bathroom was silent. I had not heard the door open. I had not heard footsteps, but the air had changed. The temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. I froze, the toilet brush dripping in my hand. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded thin and wavery, bouncing off the tiled walls. "I am cleaning in here. It is closed for 10 minutes. Silence, but not empty silence. It was a heavy, occupied silence. Someone was breathing. I could hear the faint, rhythmic intake of air, slow and controlled. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. This was it. This was the nightmare scenario every woman working the night shift dreads. A drunk passenger, a creep, someone who saw the closed for cleaning sign as an invitation rather than a warning. I stood up slowly, clutching the heavy plastic bottle of industrial cleaner like a weapon. I took a breath, trying to steady my hands. "Sir, you need to leave," I said, louder this time, trying to channel some of that lead custodian authority. "Security is just down the hall." I stepped out of the stall. He was there. The silver-haired man from gate D14 was standing in the doorway of the restroom. He was blocking my cart, blocking the exit. Up close, he looked even more out of place. His coat was immaculate, not a single lint speck on the dark wool. His scarf was silk, patterned in deep burgundy and gray. But it was his face that stopped me cold. He was not looking at me with lust or malice. He was looking at me with a profound, terrifying sadness. His eyes were a piercing, watery blue, framed by deep lines of age and experience. He held his leather briefcase in both hands in front of him, like a shield. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said. His voice was low, polished, and distinctly East Coast. It sounded like old money in libraries. It did not sound like Ashford. I took a step back, gripping the spray bottle tighter. "You cannot be in here. This is the ladies' room." He did not move. He did not blink. He just looked at me, searching my face, scanning my features as if he were reading a map he had memorized years ago. "I waited until the corridor was empty," he said, as if that explained everything. "I could not wait another night. I have watched you for 90 shifts, Stella. I have watched you clean these floors while people who are not worth the dirt on your shoes walk past you." He knew my name. He knew how many shifts he had watched. A chill that had nothing to do with the bathroom draft went down my spine. "Who are you?" I demanded. "How do you know my name?" He ignored the question. Instead, he took a small step forward, into the harsh fluorescent light. "Is your mother's name Diane Sterling?" he asked. The question hung in the air, bizarre and nonsensical. "My mother's name is Diane Henderson," I said, my voice shaking. "I have never heard the name Sterling in my life. You have the wrong person. Please let me pass." He did not move. A flicker of pain crossed his face, as if I had struck him. "Diane Henderson," he repeated, tasting the name like it was spoiled milk. "Yes, I suppose she would be." He looked at the dirty mop water in my bucket, then at the yellow cart, and finally back at my face. He looked at the name tag pinned to my polyester shirt. "You have her eyes," he said softly. "But you have his chin." "Whose chin?" I asked, my fear starting to curdle into anger. "Look, mister, I do not know what game you are playing, but I'm calling security right now." I reached for the radio clipped to my belt. "Do not," he said. It was not a command. It was a plea. "Please, just give me 2 minutes. If you press that button, I will leave, and you will never see me again. But if you listen, you might finally understand why you have spent your entire life feeling like you are waiting for a life that never started." My hand hovered over the radio. Something in his voice stopped me. It was the absolute certainty in his tone. He was not crazy. He was desperate. "2 minutes," I whispered, "and stay by the door." He nodded. He set the leather briefcase down on the wet tiles, disregarding the filth. He clicked the latches open. The sound was loud in the small room. "My name is Elias Marlowe," he said, opening the lid. "I am an attorney for the Sterling Family Trust, based in Harborview." Harborview. The name sparked a faint memory of weather maps on the news, a wealthy port city on the Atlantic, 1,000 miles away from the cornfields and factories of Illinois. "I do not know you," I said. "No," Elias said. "You do not, but I know you. I know that you dropped out of college to pay for your stepfather's back surgery. I know that you pay the mortgage on a house you do not own. I know that you have $187 in your checking account right now." I gasped. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because," he said, reaching into the briefcase, "I have been trying to find you for 15 years. He pulled out a photograph. It was old, laminated in plastic to protect it. He held it out to me. "Look at it," he said. I hesitated, then took the photo. My rubber gloves were still wet with disinfectant. It was a picture of a woman standing on a dock. The wind was blowing her hair across her face, but she was laughing. She looked young, maybe 19. She was holding a toddler in her arms. The toddler had messy brown hair and wide hazel eyes. Behind them, there was a massive cargo ship. Stenciled on the side of the ship, in giant black letters, were the words, "Sterling Oceanic Terminal," but I did not look at the ship. I looked at the woman. It was my mother, younger, happier, looking more alive than I had ever seen her, but it was definitely Diane. And then I looked at the toddler. I looked at the toddler's collarbone, visible because the little shirt had slipped down. There, clear as day, was a crescent-shaped birthmark, a mark exactly like the one I covered up with high-necked t-shirts every single day of my life. I looked up at Elias, my breath catching in my throat. The floor seemed to tilt under my feet. "That is me," I whispered. "Yes," Elias said. "That is you. And the man who took that picture owned everything you see in the background. He owned the ships. He owned the docks. He owned the skyline." He paused, and his next words hit me harder than the smell of the bleach. "He died 10 weeks ago. Stella. And everyone thinks he died without an heir, but he did not." He reached into the briefcase again and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He placed it gently on top of my cleaning cart, right next to the toilet brush. "If you sign the papers in there," Elias said, his voice trembling slightly, "the only person who will ever scrub a floor in this family again will be the man who stole your life." The name hung in the dead air of the restroom, bouncing off the porcelain and the chrome. Sterling. It was a word that did not belong in my life, and yet, as soon as he said it, something sharp and jagged snagged in the back of my brain. It was not a clear memory, but a sensation. I was 7 years old, sitting on the shag carpet of our first rental house, watching my mother stand over the trash can in the kitchen. She was tearing things up, glossy, rectangular pieces of cardstock. I remembered the sound of the heavy paper ripping, a violent, rhythmic zip-zip-zip. I had managed to grab one piece that fluttered to the floor before she snatched it back. It had been a picture of a lighthouse, stark white against a stormy gray sky. On the back, in elegant, looped handwriting, I had seen the word Sterling before my mother's hand clamped over it. "Trash," she had hissed, her voice shaking with a fear I did not understand then. "It is just junk mail. Stella, trash." I blinked, pushing the memory down deep where I kept everything else I could not afford to think about. I tightened my grip on the spray bottle. My mother had trained me for this. She had given me a script long ago, a shield to hold up against the world. "We do not have family on the East Coast," I said. my voice sounding flatter and colder than I felt. You must have the wrong person. My mother is from Ohio. We have never been to... I paused, realizing I did not even know where he was implying we were from. Harborview, he supplied gently. You are from Harborview. Never heard of it, I lied. Now, please move. I have a schedule to keep. The man, Elias, did not budge. He did not look intimidated by my lead custodian glare or the smell of industrial bleach. He looked pained. He reached into the inside pocket of his tailored wool coat. I flinched, half expecting a weapon, but he only withdrew a small, laminated square. I am not here to hurt you, Stella, he said. I am Elias Marlowe. I am an attorney with Marlowe and Finch. We represent the Sterling Family Trust in Harborview. Harborview, I had seen it on the weather maps on the break room TV. It was always 5 degrees warmer than Ashford, a place of blue oceans and high-pressure systems, a wealthy Atlantic port city that felt as distant as the moon. I do not care who you represent, I said. I have toilets to scrub. Just look, he said, extending the hand holding the laminate. Please, just look at this, and then I will walk away. I hesitated. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but curiosity is a dangerous thing. I leaned forward, careful not to let my uniform touch his expensive coat. It was a photograph, an old one, the colors slightly faded toward magenta, preserved under the plastic coating. It showed a woman standing on a wooden dock. The wind was whipping her dark hair across her face, but you could see her smile. It was a wide, unguarded, radiant smile, a smile I had never, not once in 29 years, seen on my mother's face, but it was her. It was Diane. She looked about 19, vibrant and alive, wearing a thick cable-knit sweater. In her arms, she held a toddler, a little girl with messy brown hair and wide, serious hazel eyes. My eyes, but it was the background that made me catch my breath. Behind the laughing woman and the serious baby, a massive steel hull of a cargo ship rose like a wall, stenciled in white paint along the side. Visible even past my mother's shoulder were the words, Sterling Oceanic Terminal. And standing just behind my mother, slightly out of focus, but unmistakably present, was a man. He was tall, with broad shoulders and gray hair swept back in the same style as the man standing in front of me now. He had a hand resting on my mother's shoulder, a heavy, possessive, protective hand. Who is that? I whispered, the question slipping out before I could stop it. That is Edmund Sterling, Elias said softly, your grandfather, and the founder of Sterling Horizon Logistics. We do not have grandparents, I recited automatically. End of story. You do, Elias corrected. Or you did. Look closer at the child. Stella. I looked. The toddler in the photo was wearing a loose white sundress that had slipped slightly off one shoulder. There, right near the collarbone, was a mark, a dark, crescent-shaped birthmark, looking like a little moon stamped onto the skin. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hand went instinctively to my own throat, to the high collar of my navy blue work shirt. I wore crew necks in the summer. I wore turtlenecks in the winter. I never wore V-necks. I never let anyone see that mark. I hated it. I called it my stain. The floor of the bathroom seemed to tilt to the left. I reached out and grabbed the metal partition of the stall to steady myself. The hum of the fluorescent lights suddenly sounded like a roar. Where did you get this? I asked, my voice barely a croak. We found it in Edmund's private study, Elias said. He kept it in the top drawer of his desk, under a false bottom. He died 10 weeks ago. Stella. Dead. The word landed with a dull thud. A grandfather I never knew, a man who owned ships and terminals, was dead. Why are you telling me this? I asked. If he is dead, what does it matter? He obviously didn't want us. We have been here for 20 years, eating generic mac and cheese and worrying about the electric bill. If he was so rich, where was he when my stepfather broke his back? Where was he when I had to quit school? Elias's expression tightened. Edmund did not know where you were, or rather, he was led to believe that you were gone. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur, as if the tiled walls had ears. 15 years ago, a document was filed with our firm, Elias explained. It was a deed of renunciation. It claimed that Diane Sterling wished to sever all legal and financial ties with the Sterling estate. It stated that she wanted nothing to do with her father's money. That sounds like her, I muttered. She hates handouts. Wait, Elias said, holding up a hand. On the very same day that document was filed, a second filing was made. This one was a status update regarding the line of succession. It claimed that Diane Sterling had no living issue, no children. It claimed that her only child had died in infancy. I stared at him. I am standing right here. Exactly, Elias said. But according to the paperwork in the Sterling Trust, you do not exist. And because you supposedly did not exist, and your mother supposedly renounced her claim, the entire estate, the ports, the ships, the land, everything was rerouted. It bypassed your mother and went into a temporary management trust. I let out a short, bitter laugh. It sounded harsh in the small room. A trust. You are talking about trusts and estates and ships. Look at me, Mr. Marlowe. Look at this cart. I kicked the wheel of my yellow custodial cart. It rattled pathetically. I am a janitor, I said, the anger rising in my throat like bile. I make $14 an hour. I have exactly $187 in my checking account right now, and that is only because I haven't paid the water bill yet. My car has a cracked radiator and won't start if the temperature drops below 20 degrees. I am not a hidden heiress. I am the person who cleans up when people miss the toilet bowl. I know, Elias said. He did not look at the cart. He looked at me. I know exactly what you make. I know exactly how hard you work, and that is why I am here. He reached into his briefcase one last time. He pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. He did not hand it to me. Instead, he placed it carefully on the top shelf of my cleaning cart, right next to the dirty toilet brush. The contrast between the crisp, expensive paper and the gray, bristly brush was like a punchline to a joke I didn't understand. Inside that envelope is a prepaid DNA test kit, Elias said. It is addressed to an independent lab in Harborview. There is also a formal engagement letter from my firm, Marlowe and Finch. It outlines our terms. We work on contingency. You pay nothing unless we win. Win what? I asked. If my mother renounced it, it is gone. Not if the renunciation was coerced, Elias said, his eyes hard. And not if the second document about your death was a lie. If you are who I believe you are, Stella, then someone used your name to steal a 9-figure estate. They erased you to fill their own pockets. 9 figures. I tried to do the math in my head. That was hundreds of millions of dollars. It was a number so big it meant nothing to me. It was like saying 1 billion miles. It was just noise. I cannot deal with this, I said, backing away toward the sinks. I have to finish my shift. If I'm not done with Concourse D by 3, I get written up. Take the envelope, Elias urged. Just take it. You do not have to decide tonight, but do not throw it away. Do not be like your mother and tear it up. He closed his briefcase with a sharp click. He adjusted his silk scarf, preparing to step back out into the terminal, back into the world of people who traveled and bought things and mattered. He walked to the door, then stopped. He put his hand on the frame and looked up. Not at me, but at the ceiling. I followed his gaze. He was looking at the black bubble of the security camera mounted above the entrance to the restrooms. There is one more thing you should know, he said quietly. What? I asked, my hand hovering over the envelope on my cart. Edmund did not just leave a photo, Elias said. He left a log. For the last 5 years of his life, every Tuesday night, he sat in his study and logged into the remote feed of this airport. I froze. What? He owned a stake in the construction company that built this terminal, Elias said. He had back-end access to the security system. He watched the cameras. Stella. He turned to look at me one last time, and the expression on his face broke my heart. He watched you, Elias said. He knew exactly which shift you worked. He watched you mop. He watched you empty the trash. He watched you eat your sandwich alone in the break room. He died watching you. My breath hitched. The image of the silver-haired man at gate D14 suddenly shifted in my mind. I had thought he was a stalker. I had thought he was creepy. But Elias was saying my grandfather, a man I had never met, a man who was supposedly dead to us, had spent his final years haunting me through a camera lens. He knew, I whispered. He knew you were alive, Elias said. But he was trapped by the same lie that trapped you. He couldn't reach out without risking the one thing that kept you safe. But he watched. You were never invisible to him. Stella. Elias stepped out of the restroom, his footsteps clicking away down the empty concourse. I stood there alone in the silence. The smell of bleach was still sharp in the air. The toilet brush was still dripping into the bucket, but the room felt different now. The air felt charged, heavy with ghosts. I looked up at the black dome of the security camera. I had ignored it for years, just part of the scenery. Now it felt like an eye. I looked down at the envelope. 9 figures, a stolen life, a mother who lied. I reached out, my hand trembling in my yellow rubber glove, and grabbed the envelope. I shoved it deep into the trash bag hanging off the side of my cart, underneath a layer of paper towels so no one would see it. Then I grabbed my mop. I had a job to do. I was Stella Henderson, the janitor, at least for a few more hours. But as I pushed the cart back out into the concourse, the wheels didn't just squeak. They sounded like a countdown. The drive home from the airport that morning felt like I was piloting a spaceship through a vacuum. The runway lights of Brindle Cross shrank in my rearview mirror, turning from blinding white guideposts into distant, indifferent stars. On the passenger seat of my beat-up Honda, the manila envelope Elias Marlowe had given me sat like a brick of contraband. I kept glancing at it, half expecting it to burst into flames or vanish. It was the most expensive-looking thing in my car, worth more than the dashboard it rested against. I lived in a basement studio apartment on the south side of Ashford, a place that smelled perpetually of damp earth and someone else's boiled cabbage. I locked the door behind me, threw my keys on the wobbly laminate table, and tore open the kit. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the swab. I scraped the inside of my cheek, feeling ridiculous, like I was performing a crime scene investigation on my own mouth. I sealed the sample in the prepaid overnight envelope, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I did not let myself think about what it meant. I just followed the instructions, like a good employee. Then came the hard part. I pulled out my phone and dialed the scheduling line for BrightPath Facility Services. BrightPath, this is Brenda, the voice on the other end rasped. Hey, Brenda. It is Stella, I said, pitching my voice to sound tight and panicked. It did not take much acting. I cannot make my shift tonight, or tomorrow. I have a family medical emergency. It was not technically a lie. The emergency was that my family had been amputated from a fortune I never knew existed, and the patient was my own erased identity. You know the policy. Stella. Brenda sighed, the sound of a cigarette lighter clicking in the background. Points fall off after 6 months, but a no-show is 3 points. You are pushing it. I know, I said, gripping the phone. I will bring a note. I just need 48 hours. I hung up before she could argue. Then I opened my banking app. The number on the screen stared back at me with brutal honesty, $187.14. I looked up flights to Harborview. The cheapest round-trip ticket, leaving in 3 hours, was $221. I sat on the edge of my sagging mattress and did the math. If I bought the ticket, I would overdraft. The bank would hit me with a $35 fee. That would leave me nearly $70 in the hole. I would have no money for food, no money for a cab, and no money to get back to the airport if I missed the return flight. I thought about the silver-haired man watching me mop. I thought about the wealthy airport stalker jokes. I thought about the birthmark on my collarbone. I pressed purchase. The confirmation email hit my inbox at the same moment the overdraft alert chimed. I was officially broke, but I was moving. Harborview hit me like a slap across the face. I stepped out of the terminal, a gleaming, glass-walled cathedral that made Brindle Cross look like a bus station, and into air that smelled of salt and cold. Clean money. The wind here did not carry the scent of diesel. It carried the ocean. I took a shuttle bus to the city center, clutching my backpack like it contained state secrets. The city was an alternate universe. The buildings were soaring towers of steel and blue glass, reflecting the Atlantic sun. The lobbies were polished marble. People walked with a specific kind of purpose, wearing coats that cost more than my stepdad's disability checks for a year. I watched a valet park a car that looked like a spaceship, and I realized the tip he just got was likely more than I made in a week of scrubbing toilets. The offices of Marlowe and Finch were located on the 42nd floor of a skyscraper that overlooked the harbor. The receptionist looked at my faded jeans and windbreaker with a polite, frozen smile. But the moment I said my name, her expression shifted to something sharp and alert. "Mr. Marlowe is expecting you," she said. Immediately, she led me to a conference room that was larger than my entire apartment. One wall was entirely glass, offering a panoramic view of the shipping channel below, and that was when the reality of it finally punched the air out of my lungs. Down in the harbor, massive container ships were being guided into port by tugboats. They were stacked high with red and blue steel containers. On the side of every single ship, painted in white letters 3 stories tall, was a stylized letter S. Sterling Horizon. My grandfather's name was literally painted on the skyline. I was looking at an empire, and I had just overdrafted my bank account to buy a sandwich at the gate. Elias Marlowe was waiting for me. He looked different in his natural habitat, more formidable, less like a sad old man and more like a shark in a silk suit. He did not offer me coffee. He gestured to a chair at the head of a long mahogany table covered in charts and documents. "I am glad you came," he said simply. He slid a pale blue folder across the polished wood. I opened it. It was a summary of assets, a list that went on for pages. "Edmund Sterling built Sterling Horizon from a single tugboat," Elias began, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "Today, it controls ports on 3 continents, a fleet of 45 freighters, prime waterfront real estate in New York, London, and Singapore. The valuation is conservative, but we are looking at an estate worth in excess of $900 million. I stared at the numbers. They looked like coordinates to another planet. "And you think this belongs to me?" "I know it belongs to you," Elias said. "Because of the integrity clause." He flipped to a page in the folder marked with a red tab. "Edmund was a hard man," Elias explained. "He hated the idea of dynasty. He hated the idea of trust fund children who did nothing but spend money they did not earn. When he wrote his will, he included a specific clause, the integrity clause. It states that for an heir to inherit the controlling interest in Sterling Horizon, they must be engaged in verifiable, self-sufficient labor for at least 1 year prior to his death. They could not be on the Sterling payroll. They could not be receiving an allowance. They had to be working. I felt a chill run down my spine. Working. Real work, Elias clarified. Blue-collar work, service work. He wanted an heir who knew what it felt like to sweat for a paycheck. If the heir did not meet this criteria, the estate would fall into a managed trust, controlled by an executor. "So," I whispered, the realization dawning on me with the force of a physical blow. My job, the mopping, the graveyard shift. "It was not just a job," Elias said intensely. "It was your qualification. Edmund watched you to make sure you were safe, yes, but he also watched you to make sure you were worthy. Every time you clocked in, you were satisfying the clause. You were earning the empire, hour by hour." He paused, letting that sink in. My $14 an hour was not just a wage. It was the key to the kingdom. But there was a problem, Elias continued, his voice darkening. 10 years ago, a document arrived at this firm. It was a deed of renunciation, allegedly signed by your mother, Diane Sterling. He placed a document on the table. It looked official, stamped and notarized. On the very same day, Elias said, slamming a second document down next to it. A supplemental filing was made. It claimed Diane had no living issue. It erased you, Stella. It claimed you had died of a childhood illness. Who filed it? I asked, my hands clenching into fists on the table. Gavin Royce. Elias spat the name out like a curse. He is a distant cousin of Edmund's late wife, a mediocre man with expensive tastes. Edmund despised him. He called him a leech, but with Diane renouncing and you dead on paper, the integrity clause was null and void. The estate defaulted to the backup plan, a temporary management trust. Controlled by Gavin, I guessed. Controlled by Gavin, Elias confirmed. For the last 10 years, since Edmund's health began to decline and he stepped back from daily operations, Gavin has been acting as the trustee. He has been managing the fortune, and by managing, I mean siphoning. Elias opened another file. He laid out 2 images side by side. Look at this, he commanded. The image on the left was a copy of my mother's driver's license from 12 years ago. Her signature was bold, loopy, with a sharp, aggressive slant. The image on the right was the signature on the deed of renunciation. It looked similar, but wrong. It was shaky. It looked like someone trying to draw a signature rather than write one. We had a forensic handwriting analyst look at this, Elias said, pointing a manicured finger at the letter S in sterling on the renunciation document. See this hook? At the top of the S. Diane never wrote her S like that. It is a hesitation mark. It is the mark of a forger pausing to check their work. I looked at the shaky scrawl. It looked pathetic. It looked like a lie. Legally, Elias said, leaning back. Even if the renunciation was real, the estate should have passed down to Diane's children. A mother cannot renounce her child's inheritance. The only way Gavin gets control is if you disappear. That is why he filed the death certificate affidavit. That is why you are invisible. So he stole it, I said, the anger finally burning through the shock. He stole everything. He did more than steal it, Elias said grimly. He has been living on it. While you were scrubbing toilets at Brindle Cross to pay for your stepfather's surgery, Gavin Royce bought a villa in Tuscany. While you were overdrafting your account to fly here today, Gavin Royce charged a $40,000 consultation fee to the estate for a lunch meeting. He pushed the DNA kit receipt toward me. The DNA will confirm what the photograph already screams, Elias said. Science will prove you are Edmund's granddaughter. That is the easy part. But the real war is not about biology. It is about fraud. It is about proving that Gavin Royce forged these documents and spent a decade draining your legacy. I looked out the window at the ships. I looked at the S painted on the steel containers. I thought about the management fees Gavin had been collecting while I ate instant noodles. I thought about the house rule. We don't have grandparents. My mother had not just been hiding from her father, she had been hiding from a crime. What do we do? I asked. My voice was steady now. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. We sue him, Elias said. We file a petition to freeze the trust. We expose the forgery, but there is a catch. Stella, there is always a catch, I said. The integrity clause, Elias reminded me. It requires the heir to be engaged in labor. If you quit your job, if you stop working before the judge rules, Gavin can argue that you have violated the terms of the will. He can argue that you are just another gold digger looking for a handout. He looked me dead in the eye. To win this, Elias said, you have to keep scrubbing those floors. You have to go back to Brindle Cross, put on that uniform, and work the graveyard shift while we fight him in court. Your mop is the only thing holding this claim together. I looked at my hands. They were rough, red, and tired. But for the first time in my life, they did not feel empty. They felt like weapons. I will work, I said. I will scrub every inch of that terminal if it means taking him down. Elias nodded slowly. Good. Because Gavin Royce knows the estate is under audit. He doesn't know about you yet, but he knows something is coming. And when he finds out the girl he erased is still alive, he is going to throw everything he has at you. Let him try, I said. And I meant it. I was used to being invisible. I was used to people looking right through me. Gavin Royce was about to learn that the thing about invisible people is that you never see them coming until it is too late. Elias had typed up the document on his heavy, cream-colored letterhead before I left Harborview. It was a limited power of attorney, specific enough to be a scalpel, but broad enough to be a crowbar. It stated, in dense legal language, that I had the immediate right to retrieve, possess, and inspect any personal vital records, financial instruments, or identification documents bearing my name or my mother's name that were currently stored in the residence on Cedar Lane. It is a piece of paper, Elias had warned me as he handed it over, his eyes serious behind his wire-rimmed glasses. It does not give you the strength to walk through that door. You have to find that yourself. I found it somewhere between the layover in Detroit and the drive back to Ashford. It was a cold, hard knot in the center of my chest, fueled by 29 years of being the one who fixed the leaks and paid the late fees. I stood on the cracked concrete walkway of my childhood home. The vinyl siding, once a cheerful yellow, had faded to the color of an old bruise. The gutter over the porch was still sagging where I had tried to wire it up last winter. It was the house I paid the mortgage on whenever Hank forgot. The house where I slept in the basement so Jenna could have the south-facing room with the good light. But standing there now, clutching the leather portfolio Elias had given me, I felt like a stranger. No, worse. I felt like a trespasser. I didn't use my key. I rang the bell. It took a long time for the door to open. When it did, my mother, Diane, stood there with a dish rag thrown over one shoulder. She looked tired, her hair pulled back in a messy clip, wearing the same faded floral blouse she had worn for 10 years. Her eyes widened when she saw me, but it wasn't relief. It was annoyance. "Stella?" she asked, wiping her hands on her jeans. "I thought you were working double shifts. Where have you been? I called you twice about the electric bill." "I went away for a day," I said, my voice steady. Diane frowned, her lips thinning into a line of disapproval. "Away? You mean a trip with what money? Stella, you know Jenna's textbooks for next semester are already outrageous. She needs that organic chemistry book, and it is $300 used, and you are off taking vacations." The familiar guilt script washed over me. The automatic reflex to apologize, to explain, to promise I would pick up extra hours. But then I felt the weight of the portfolio in my hand. I thought about the photo of the woman laughing on the dock. "I am not here to talk about Jenna's books," I said, stepping past her into the entryway. "I need the box. Mom." Diane blinked, turning to follow me as I walked into the living room. The air inside smelled like dust and cinnamon air freshener, trying to cover up the scent of old carpets. "What box?" she asked, her voice rising in pitch. "The metal cash box," I said, stopping in front of the fake fireplace. I looked at the mantel. The mutilated photo was still there. Baby Jenna, Hank, and the empty space where I should have been. "The gray one you keep on the top shelf of your closet, the one labeled receipts and taxes." Diane froze. The color drained out of her face so fast, it was like someone had pulled a plug. She took a quick step in front of the hallway that led to the bedrooms, physically blocking my path. "That," she let out a high, nervous laugh. "Stella, do not be ridiculous. That is just boring paperwork, old tax returns, receipts for the furnace. You do not need to see that. Why would you even care about that?" "I need it," I said, moving toward her. "Now." "No," she snapped, spreading her arms out. "You are acting crazy. You disappear for 2 days, come back looking like you haven't slept, and demand to see my private papers. I am your mother. Stella, you do not make demands in this house." "I pay for this house," I said quietly, "and I have a legal right to my own documents." The words "legal right" hit her like a physical slap. Her eyes darted around the room, panic flaring in them. "Legal? What are you talking about? Who have you been talking to?" Before I could answer, the sound of gravel crunching in the driveway cut through the tension. We both looked out the front window, a black SUV, sleek and shiny and completely out of place on our street of rusted pickups and sedans, was pulling in behind my Honda. Diane let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "Oh, thank God." The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a mid-tier tailored suit that cost more than our car, but he wore it with a kind of aggressive casualness, unbuttoned at the collar. He had a thick gold watch and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was Gavin Royce. I recognized him immediately. Though I had only seen him a handful of times over the years, he was the old family friend, the financial advisor who supposedly helped Mom manage Hank's disability payments. He was the one who always brought Jenna expensive birthday gifts and brought me a pat on the head. He walked up the walkway like he owned it. He didn't knock. He just opened the front door and stepped inside, bringing a gust of cold air and the smell of expensive cologne with him. "Ladies," he said, his voice smooth, baritone, and dripping with condescension. "I was just in the neighborhood and saw Stella's car. I thought I would stop by and see how my favorite girls are doing." He looked at Diane, who was trembling near the hallway, and then he turned his gaze to me. It was a look of assessment, cold and calculating. He was sizing me up, trying to decide if I was a threat or just a nuisance. "Hello, Gavin," I said. "Stella?" He nodded, flashing a white-toothed smile. "You look intense today. Your mother looks upset. Is everything all right? Are we having a little temper tantrum about money again? You know, if you need a loan for something, you can always ask me. We do not need to upset Diane." He was treating me like a child. He was treating me like the janitor he thought I was. "I do not need a loan," I said. "I need the gray box in my mother's closet." Gavin's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went hard. He took a step closer to me, invading my personal space. He was taller than me, looming over me. "Now, Stella," he purred. "We all have our little secrets, don't we, private things? Family things, digging up old family drama. Well, it gets messy. It hurts people. It could even cost people their freedom if they are not careful." It was a threat, a polite, veiled threat, but a threat nonetheless. He was telling me that if I pushed this, he would let my mother take the fall for whatever fraud they had committed. I looked him dead in the eye. "I am not afraid of the mess. Gavin, I clean up messes for a living." I pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I had looked up in the car. I put it on speaker. "A One Mobile Locksmith," a voice answered. "Hi," I said, never breaking eye contact with Gavin. "I am at 412 Cedar Lane. I have a locked document box that I need drilled open immediately. I have proof of residence and ID. How fast can you get here?" "I have a van 2 blocks away," the dispatcher said. 10 minutes, $80 service fee." "I will pay double if he is here in 5, I said. "Done." I hung up. Gavin's face flushed a dark, ugly red. The smooth mask slipped. "You little brat," he hissed. "You cannot do that. I will call the police. You are harassing your mother." "Call them," I deadpanned. "Please call the Ashford Police Department. I would love to explain to them that you are obstructing a probate inquiry regarding the estate of Edmund Sterling. I am sure they would be fascinated to hear why a financial advisor is physically preventing an heir from accessing her own birth records." The name Edmund Sterling hung in the air like smoke. Diane let out a whimper and sank onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. "Stop it," she moaned. "Please, just stop it." Gavin stared at me. For the first time, I saw fear behind the arrogance. He didn't know how much I knew. He didn't know about Elias. He just knew I had said the name. "You are making a mistake," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You are going to regret this." 5 minutes, I said, checking my watch. The next 10 minutes were the longest of my life. The locksmith, a burly guy named Mike with grease under his fingernails, arrived in 6. He didn't ask questions. He just looked at the tension in the room, looked at my ID, and nodded. "Where is the box?" I asked Diane. She didn't answer. She just wept, I walked past Gavin, who moved as if to grab my arm, then thought better of it when Mike hefted his drill. I went into her bedroom. I reached up to the top shelf of the closet. Behind the winter blankets, I felt the cold metal of the handle. I brought the gray box out and set it on my mother's bed, the bed where I used to sit when I had nightmares as a kid. "Open it," I told Mike. Gavin stood in the doorway, pacing like a caged tiger. He was making a call on his cell phone, whispering furiously, his hand cupped over his mouth. Diane sat on the edge of the bed, wringing her hands so hard her knuckles were white. "It is all a misunderstanding," she whispered to the floor. "Stella, please, it was for your own good. You do not understand." Whir. The sound of the drill biting into the lock was deafening. Metal shrieked against metal. It sounded like a scream. Pop. The lock cylinder gave way. Mike packed up his drill, took the $160 cash I handed him from my tips envelope, and left without a word. The room was silent. I lifted the lid. The smell of old paper drifted up. I reached in. The first thing I pulled out were 2 birth certificates. They were paper-clipped together. The top one I knew. It was the one I had used to get my driver's license. My job at the airport. Stella Henderson. Mother Diane Henderson. Father unknown. The bottom one was yellowed with age. It was an original. Stella Sterling. Mother Diane Sterling. Father. Unknown. Grandparent guardian. Edmund Sterling. I held them up, my hands shaking. "Father unknown on both," I said, my voice breaking. "But look at the last name. Mom, look at the grandfather." Diane wouldn't look. I reached back in. There was a stack of bank statements, not from a local bank, but from Northbridge Trustees LLC. I flipped through them. Every month, there was a transfer. Management fee. $15,000. Consulting fee. $12,000. Discretionary disbursement. $8,000. Thousands and thousands of dollars. Every single month. For 10 years. While I was eating ramen. While I was dropping out of college because we couldn't afford the tuition. While I was taking extra shifts to pay for the water heater. And then I found the check. It was a carbon copy of a cashier's check, dated 6 months ago. The payee was Prestige Motors of Ashford. The amount was $38,000. The memo line read, "Vehicle purchase. J. Sterling." I felt like I was going to vomit. "Jenna's car," I whispered. "The convertible. You told me she won it in a scholarship raffle. You told me it was a prize." Diane sobbed louder. "She worked so hard. Stella, she needed a safe car. You know how I worry." "A safe car?" I screamed, slamming the paper down on the bed. "It is a convertible, and you paid for it with $38,000 of stolen money while I was driving a car with no heat." Gavin stepped into the room. "It is not stolen," he said coldly. "It is managed funds. Jenna is a beneficiary of the management strategy." "And what am I?" I asked, turning to him. "What am I, Gavin?" "You," he said, sneering, "are a liability." I reached into the box for the last document. It was at the bottom, in a blue folder. It looked official. Durable power of attorney and general waiver. I opened it. It was thick. Every page was initialed by my mother, but it was the last page that made my knees buckle. There was a signature line for Diane Sterling, and below it, a signature line for Stella Sterling, and there was my signature. It was my handwriting, scrawled, shaky, weak, but mine. I stared at the date next to it, November 12th, 11 years ago. I remembered that day. I remembered the pain. It was like a hot poker being twisted in my gut. My gallbladder had burst. I had been rushed to the emergency room. I remembered lying in the hospital bed, high on morphine, the room spinning. I remembered my mother standing over me, holding a clipboard. "Just sign here, baby," she had said, her voice sweet and worried. "It is just for the insurance. We have to sign it so the doctors can operate. Just sign it so Mommy can take care of everything." I had signed it. I had signed it because I trusted her. I had signed it because I was 18 and in pain and she was my mother. I looked at the document now. It wasn't insurance paperwork. It was a waiver. It stated that I, Stella Sterling, being of sound mind and body, voluntarily waived all future claims to the estate of Edmund Sterling, acknowledged receipt of a complete settlement of $0, and granted full power of attorney over my financial interests to Diane Sterling and her appointed agents. I looked up at Diane. She was finally looking at me. Her eyes were red and swollen, pleading. "You tricked me," I whispered. The betrayal hurt more than the gallbladder ever had. "I was in the hospital. I was on morphine. You told me it was insurance. I had to," she cried out. "Gavin said Edmund would cut us off completely. He said Edmund hated us. He said if we didn't sign the waiver and hide you, Edmund would take you away from me because I was unfit. I did it to keep you. Stella, I did it to be your mother." "No," I said, my voice cold as ice. "You did it to keep the money. You sold me for a monthly allowance and a convertible for Jenna." I grabbed the contents of the box, the birth certificates, the bank statements, the check, the waiver, and shoved them into my leather portfolio. "You are not taking that," Gavin said, moving to block the door. "Those are private documents." I held up the limited power of attorney Elias had drafted. "Not anymore. This grants me the right to seize this evidence. And if you touch me, Gavin, I swear to God, I will add assault to the list of charges I'm filing against you." He hesitated. In that split second of hesitation, I saw the truth. He was a bully. He was used to pushing around widows and confused teenagers. He wasn't ready for a woman who spent her nights wrestling industrial polishers and breaking up fights in the terminal. I pushed past him. My shoulder slammed into his chest. Hard. He stumbled back. I walked down the hallway, past the living room with the mutilated photo, and out the front door. "Stella!" my mother screamed from the bedroom window. "Stella, come back. We can fix this." I didn't look back. I got into my car, threw the portfolio on the passenger seat, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely put the key in the ignition. I drove away from Cedar Lane. I didn't go back to my apartment. I drove straight to the highway, heading toward the airport. I had a flight to catch, and I had a lawsuit to file. The conference table in Elias Marlowe's office was a slab of dark, polished mahogany that looked like it cost more than my mother's entire house. When I turned the leather portfolio upside down and shook it, the contents of the gray metal box spilled out across the wood with a chaotic flutter. It was a mess of crumpled paper, yellowed certificates, and stapled receipts, the debris of a lie that had lasted 29 years. I watched Elias pick up the birth certificates first. He held them side by side, his face unreadable. Then he picked up the waiver. This was the document that terrified me the most, the one with my shaky, morphine-addled signature scrawled across the bottom line. Elias adjusted his glasses, reading the fine print. His jaw tightened until a muscle jumped in his cheek. "Look at this," he said, his voice low and dangerous. He turned the document over to show me the binding. "See these staple holes, the ones that do not line up?" I leaned in. There were 3 sets of tiny punctures in the top left corner of the signature page, but only one set in the cover page. This signature page was ripped off a medical liability form, Elias explained, his finger tracing the jagged paper edge. And then it was restapled to this packet, this text here, the part about the disposition of Sterling-related claims and waiving all future inheritance rights. "You never saw this page. Stella. You signed a standard hospital release form for your surgery, and Gavin Royce physically attached your signature to a completely different contract. Is that legal?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "It is fraud," Elias said. "It is forgery, and it is a felony." The door to the conference room opened, and 2 people walked in. One was a man carrying a briefcase full of optical equipment. The other was a woman with sharp eyes and a laptop tucked under her arm. "This is Arthur," Elias introduced the man. "He is our forensic document examiner, and this is Maria. She is a forensic accountant. They are going to take this pile of paper and turn it into a weapon." For the next 4 hours, I watched my life get disassembled and analyzed under high-powered magnification. Arthur set up a rig of lights and lenses over the deed of renunciation, the document my mother supposedly signed 15 years ago. He projected the image onto a large screen on the wall. "Here," Arthur said, pointing a laser at the loop of the capital S in sterling. "And here, at the cross of the T. See the hesitation. The ink pools slightly. A natural signature is fluid. It is muscle memory. This," he scoffed, "this is a drawing. The person who wrote this was copying a shape, not signing a name." He overlaid a sample of Gavin Royce's handwriting from a publicly available court filing. He zoomed in on the letter G. "The writer has a distinctive tick," Arthur noted. "He starts his upstrokes with a heavy pressure point. You see it here in the forged D for Diane. It is identical to the pressure point in Gavin's own signature. He did not just forge it. He left his fingerprints in the ink." While Arthur dismantled the signature, Maria was building a flowchart of greed on the whiteboard. She had taken the bank statements from Northbridge trustees and plugged the data into her software. "It is a classic siphon scheme," Maria said, uncapping a red marker. "The Sterling estate pays Northbridge trustees a management fee. That is standard. But look where the money goes from Northbridge." She drew a line to a box she labeled Consulting Group Alpha. "Shell Company," she said. "Registered to a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands, that company pays a retainer to Royce Lifestyle Management." She drew another line. "And Royce Lifestyle Management pays the mortgage on a villa in Tuscany. It pays for first-class flights to Dubai. It pays for a membership at a private golf club in Scarsdale that costs $50,000 a year." She drew one final line, thick and red, leading to a single transaction dated 6 months ago. "And here's the kicker," Maria said, tapping the board. "A direct cashier's check from the Northbridge operating account to Prestige Motors of Ashford. $38,000. He got sloppy. He stopped laundering it through the shells and just wrote a check to buy your sister a car." I stared at the board. Every line was a theft. Every box was a month of my life spent worrying about rent. "We have enough," Elias said, standing up. The energy in the room shifted instantly. It went from analytical to predatory. "We file now." He picked up the phone on the conference table. "Get the probate clerk on the line. I am filing an emergency civil petition. Stella Henderson versus Gavin Royce and Northbridge Trustees, LLC. I felt a shiver go through me at the sound of my name versus his. "We are demanding 3 things," Elias told me, counting them off on his fingers. 1. We want the probate court to recognize you as the sole biological heir of Edmund Sterling. 2. We are filing for an immediate freeze on all estate assets. We want the spigot turned off. Gavin cannot spend another dime of your money to hire his defense team." "And 3? I asked. "3 is the kill shot," Elias said. "Preservation notices. We are sending legal warnings to every bank, every brokerage firm, and every board of directors associated with Sterling Horizon. We are putting them on notice that if a single email is deleted, if a single ledger is shredded, they will be held in contempt of court. We are locking Gavin in a glass box where he cannot move without breaking something." He looked at me, his expression turning serious. "But there is a catch, Stella, and it is the most important part of this entire strategy. The integrity clause," I said. "Exactly," Elias said. "Edmund's will is specific. The heir must be engaged in verifiable, self-sufficient labor. That clause is the only reason the estate did not automatically vest in Gavin years ago. It is the only reason we have a case. If that clause is not satisfied, the will fails, and the default provisions kick in." "Which means," I started. "Which means," Elias finished, "that if you stop working, we lose. If you quit your job at Brightpath, we lose. If you get fired, we lose." The room went silent. The implication hung heavy in the air. "My job," I whispered. "My $14 an hour job. It is the linchpin." "It is more than a linchpin," Elias said fiercely. "It is your shield. As long as you are punching that clock, you are fulfilling the terms of the will. You are the rightful heir. But the moment you stop, Gavin can argue that you are no different than the trust fund leeches Edmund hated. He can argue that the clause has lapsed. I realized then what was going to happen. Gavin was not just going to fight me in court. He was going to come after my livelihood. He will try to get me fired, I said. He knows people. He is powerful. He could call the contractor. He could make up complaints. He will almost certainly try, Elias agreed. He will try to break you. He will try to make you miss shifts. He will try to make you snap and walk out. You cannot let him. He walked around the table and put a hand on my shoulder. You have to go back to Ashford. Stella, you have to put that uniform back on. You have to scrub those toilets and empty those trash cans. You have to work the graveyard shift tonight, and tomorrow night, and every night until the judge bangs that gavel. Your mop is worth more than any yacht he has ever bought. Do you understand? I nodded. I understand. Good, Elias said, because the moment I file this petition, the clock starts ticking. You are not just a janitor anymore. You are active evidence. I flew back to Ashford that evening. The flight was turbulent, bumping through the heavy cloud cover of the Midwest, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing with dates, figures, and legal strategies. I landed at 9 in the evening. I did not go home. I drove straight to the employee lot, parked my car between a rusted pickup truck and a Corolla with a missing bumper, and walked to the time clock. My uniform felt different when I put it on. Usually, the polyester felt itchy and heavy, a symbol of everything I was trapped in. Tonight, it felt like armor. I pinned my name tag Stella to my chest. I clocked in at 10 o'clock sharp. The machine beeped, a green light flashing, recorded, verifiable, self-sufficient labor. I grabbed my cart. It still rattled. The left front wheel still wobbled, but as I pushed it out onto the floor of Concourse D, the terminal did not look the same. Yesterday, the airport had been a place of drudgery. It had been a gray, endless loop of scuff marks and spills. Tonight, it looked like a battlefield. I looked up at the ceiling. The black domes of the security cameras were everywhere. Every 30 feet, a camera was watching. Edmund watched footage of this terminal every week for years, Elias had said. I realized then that I was not alone. The cameras were not just surveillance. They were witnesses. They were recording my claim to the throne. I walked past the PA system speakers. I looked at the digital flight boards flipping over with destinations London, Tokyo, Dubai, destinations that were serviced by ships with my name on them. I saw the terminal for what it was, a machine of movement and logistics, a massive, breathing organism of commerce, and I was the one keeping it clean. I was the one making sure the gears did not grind to a halt. I pushed my cart toward gate D14. The seat under the monitor was empty. The silver-haired man was gone, but his presence was stamped into the vinyl. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Elias. Petition filed. Service of process is out. He knows. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of floor wax and jet fuel. I pulled the mop from the bucket, wrung it out with a solid, wet slap against the plastic, and slapped it onto the terrazzo floor. Let him come. I thought, let Gavin Royce try to take this away from me. He thought he was fighting a helpless girl who signed papers without reading them. He did not know he was fighting the woman who cleaned up the mess everyone else left behind. I started to mop, my movements precise and rhythmic. The buffer hummed in the distance, a low, steady growl. In my head, it sounded like the stamp of a court seal hitting a judgment. Bang, bang, bang. I was not just cleaning the floor, I was drawing the battle lines. The plan was born in the middle of the night, fueled by stale takeout coffee and Elias Marlowe's relentless obsession with old blueprints. He had been digging through the archives of the Greater Harborview Port Authority when he founded a dusty, forgotten ledger from 30 years ago. It turned out that Edmund Sterling had not just watched Brindle Cross International Airport on a screen. He had helped pay for the concrete I walked on every night. He was a silent donor for the construction of Concourse D, Elias told me over the phone, his voice buzzing with that specific frequency of lawyerly excitement. There is even a small brass plaque behind the currency exchange booth acknowledging his gift. No one looks at it. It is probably covered in dust. So, I asked, sitting on the floor of my apartment, sorting laundry. He donated money. Rich people do that for tax write-offs. So, Elias said, it gives us venue jurisdiction. It gives us a reason to be there that has nothing to do with mopping. He proposed a move so bold it made my stomach turn over. He wanted to petition the airport authority to install a temporary memorial exhibit right in the middle of the terminal. He wanted to call it Logistics Visionary Edmund Sterling, A Legacy of Connection. You want to put up a shrine to my grandfather in the place where I scrubbed toilets? I asked. Elias, I am trying to keep my job, not turn it into a circus. If Brightpath finds out I am involved in some legal stunt, they will fire me for creating a disturbance. They will not fire you, Elias countered. Because you will not be the organizer. The airport will be the organizer. Airports crave good public relations. Stella. They love words like legacy and community partnership. We pitch this as a celebration of regional history. We offer to pay for the setup. The director of the airport will get his picture in the paper. He will approve it before he even finishes his morning bagel. Elias was right. Director Holloway, a man whose primary concern was usually the wait times at TSA, practically drooled at the idea of being associated with the Sterling name. Within 48 hours, the permits were signed. A space was cleared under the main departures board in Concourse D. A stage was booked. Then came the bait. Elias had the board of directors for Sterling Horizon send a formal, gold-embossed invitation to Gavin Royce. The invitation asked him to speak at the unveiling ceremony as the faithful steward of the Sterling estate. He will not come, I said, looking at the heavy cardstock. He knows we are circling him. He is paranoid. He is paranoid, Elias agreed. But he is also a narcissist, and more importantly, he is trying to maintain the illusion of control. If he refuses to honor Edmund Sterling at a public event, he looks weak. He looks like he is hiding something. But if he comes, he gets to stand in front of cameras and play the grieving, responsible successor. His ego will not let him stay home. We tipped off the local business journals and the metro news stations. We told them that a major announcement regarding the future of Sterling Horizon would be made at the airport. In the business world, that phrase was like blood in the water. Cameras and notepads were guaranteed. And me, I was the ghost in the machine. I was officially scheduled to work that morning. My name was on the roster not as an heir, but as logistics support. It was a fancy way of saying I would be there to move chairs, empty trash cans, and ensure the floor was shiny enough for Gavin Royce to see his own reflection. You will be in full uniform, Elias instructed. You will have your cart. You will have your mop. To Gavin, you will be part of the background, just like you have always been. That is exactly what we want. We want him to look right past you until it is too late. The preparation was like planning a heist. While I worked my regular night shifts, Elias and his team were in a dark editing bay in Harborview, cutting together a video. It was billed as a tribute reel, a 3-minute loop of images celebrating Edmund Sterling's life. But it was not a tribute. It was an indictment. They scanned the documents we had stolen from the gray box on Cedar Lane. They took the high-resolution images of the forged signatures, with the forensic red markers circling the hesitation marks. They took the Northbridge bank statements showing the siphoned millions. They took the receipt for Jenna's convertible. And then, they did something brilliant. At the very end of the reel, they embedded a massive QR code. The moment that code hits the screen, Elias explained, it links directly to a public server hosting your freshly filed complaint and every single exhibit. The lawsuit goes live on the court docket at 9 in the morning. The ceremony starts at 9:15. By the time the code scans, the evidence is already legal record. It is a grenade. Stella. And you are going to be the one to pull the pin. The morning of the memorial. The terminal felt electric. The usual hum of travel, the rolling suitcases, the announcements. The crying babies was overlaid with a tense, artificial energy. A large banner hung from the rafters, Edmund Sterling, builder of horizons. A podium had been set up directly beneath the massive digital departures board. The one that flipped over every few minutes with a clattering sound like falling rain. A large LED screen stood to the right of the stage, currently displaying a static image of the Sterling Horizon logo. I was there at 8 o'clock, pushing my cart. The left wheel was still squeaking squeak, drag, squeak, drag. I had asked maintenance to fix it, but then I realized the sound was perfect. It was the sound of invisibility. It was a noise people tuned out. I positioned myself near a secondary microphone stand that had been set up for audience QA, though everyone knew these events never had real questions. I started wiping down the chrome stanchions of the velvet ropes, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack a rib. Travelers rushed past me, dodging the wet floor sign. They didn't look at me. I was just the janitor. I was part of the infrastructure, like the water fountain or the fire extinguisher. At 9:10, the black SUVs arrived at the curb outside. Gavin Royce entered the terminal like a head of state. He was flanked by 2 junior associates from his firm and a private security guard. He wore a dark navy suit that was tailored to within an inch of its life, a power tie in aggressive crimson, and cufflinks that glinted under the fluorescent lights. He looked confident. He looked rich. He walked with the easy rolling stride of a man who believes the ground exists solely to support his feet. Director Holloway rushed forward to greet him, shaking his hand vigorously. "Mr. Royce, an honor, a true honor to help celebrate Edmund's legacy." "The honor is mine," Gavin said. His voice was smooth, practiced, projecting just enough volume to be heard by the gathering press. Edmund loved this city. He loved the flow of commerce. It is only fitting we remember him here. He scanned the room. His eyes swept over the crowd of reporters, the curious travelers stopping to watch, the airport staff. His gaze passed over me. It didn't linger. It didn't pause. To him, I was just a shape in navy blue polyester, holding a spray bottle. I was a pixel in the background of his high-definition life. He didn't even blink. He walked up the steps to the podium. The cameras flashed. A staccato burst of lightning. He adjusted the microphone, waiting for the applause to die down. I gripped the handle of my cart. My palms were sweating inside my rubber gloves. This was it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gavin began, his voice echoing through the concourse, "we live in a world that moves fast. Cargo, capital, people, everything is in motion. But Edmund Sterling knew that motion means nothing without direction, and direction means nothing without integrity." I felt a surge of bile in my throat. Integrity. He actually used the word. "Edmund was a man of principles," Gavin continued, warming up to his performance. He looked solemn, respectful. When he passed, he left a void that I have done my humble best to fill. Protecting his vision has been the honor of my life. Keeping his estate safe, keeping his company strong, this is not just business. It is a sacred trust. He paused for effect. The reporters nodded, scribbling in their notebooks. Sacred trust. It was sickening. "There are those who say the age of the great industrialist is over," Gavin said, raising a hand. "But I say, as long as we honor the wishes of the founders, as long as we respect the legal and moral frameworks they built, the horizon is limitless." He was about to wrap up. He was about to introduce the tribute video, expecting a montage of ships and sunsets that Elias's team had supposedly approved. I looked at Elias, who was standing near the back of the press pool, dressed in a nondescript gray suit, looking like any other traveler. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. Now, I let go of the velvet rope. I grabbed my cart. Squeak, drag, squeak, drag. The sound cut through the hushed silence of the crowd. It was jarring, unpleasant. Heads turned. People frowned. "Why is the janitor moving during the speech?" Gavin looked down from the podium, annoyed, his brow furrowed. He saw a custodial worker pushing a dirty yellow cart right up to the secondary microphone. I didn't stop. I pushed the cart until it bumped gently against the base of the mic stand. The feedback whined for a split second, a sharp, high-pitched screech that made everyone wince. "Excuse me," I said. My voice boomed over the PA system. It was louder than I expected. It bounced off the glass walls and the high ceilings. Gavin froze. He stared at me, confused. He still didn't recognize me. He just saw a disruption. "We are in the middle of a presentation," he snapped, covering his mic with his hand, though his voice was still audible. "Security, can we clear the floor?" I didn't back down. I leaned into the mic. I looked him straight in the eyes, those cold, calculating eyes that had dismissed me in my mother's living room. "I am sorry to interrupt, Mr. Royce," I said, my voice steady, powered by 10 years of silence. "But you mentioned integrity, and you mentioned protecting Edmund's vision." Recognition flickered in his eyes. He squinted. He saw the hazel eyes. He saw the chin. His face went pale. "You," he whispered, the word lost in the distance between us. "I think," I said, addressing the crowd, the cameras, and the entire terminal, "that before we talk about sacred trusts, we should check the receipts. If you could all please turn your attention to the screen for a short logistics presentation." I reached into my pocket and pressed the remote button Elias had given me. The screen behind Gavin didn't show a sunset. It didn't show a ship. It flashed bright white, and then a document appeared. It was 10 feet tall. It was Edmund's handwritten note, the one Elias had found in the initial search, referencing my daughter Diane and her living issue. Beside it, the photo from the dock appeared. Me, my mother, Edmund, the date stamped in the corner. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Then the screen split. On the left, my mother's real signature from her DMV records. On the right, the shaky, forged scrawl from the renunciation document, a giant red circle animated around the hooked S. Gavin turned around. He looked at the screen. He looked back at me. He looked like he had seen a ghost. "Turn it off!" he screamed. His composure shattered instantly. "Turn that off. This is a technical malfunction. Cut the power." "It is not a malfunction," I said into the mic, my voice overriding his panic. "It is an audit." The screen changed again. Northbridge Trustees bank statements. Highlighted rows. Management fee, $15,000. Consulting fee, $12,000. And then, the pièce de résistance, the receipt for the convertible, vehicle purchase, J. Sterling, paid from estate funds. The reporters weren't writing anymore. They were holding their phones up, recording the screen. "This is slander," Gavin roared, lunging toward the edge of the stage. "This is hijacked security, arrest that woman." "And finally," I said, ignoring him as he practically frothed at the mouth, "for anyone who wants to read the full complaint filed this morning in the Harborview Superior Court." The QR code slammed onto the screen. It was massive, black and white pixels forming a maze of justice. "Scan it," I said. "It tells a very different story about where the money went." Gavin jumped down from the stage. He was coming for me. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He wasn't the smooth executive anymore. He was a cornered animal. "You bitter little janitor," he shouted, closing the distance. "You think you can come here with your mop and your lies? I will bury you, I will ruin you." He reached out to grab the microphone stand, to rip it away from me, but he never touched me. 2 airport security officers stepped in front of him. They didn't look at me. They looked at the man screaming and lunging at a member of their staff. "Sir," the lead officer said, putting a hand on Gavin's chest, "you need to step back. You are causing a disruption in a secure area." "Disruption," Gavin sputtered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is the disruption. She is hijacking my event." "It looks like a presentation to me, sir," the officer said calmly. The cameras swiveled. They weren't pointed at the banner anymore. They were pointed at Gavin Royce, red-faced and sweating, being held back by security while a janitor stood calmly by her cart. A reporter from the Ashford Business Journal shouted out a question. "Mr. Royce, can you explain why the Northbridge mailing address listed on that statement matches your personal consulting firm?" Gavin froze. He looked at the reporter. He looked at the screen, which was still broadcasting his crimes to the entire concourse. That is, we consolidated correspondence for efficiency," he stammered. Elias stepped out from the crowd. He walked right up to the officers. He held up a piece of paper. "Officers," Elias said, his voice projecting clearly, "I am Elias Marlowe, attorney for the plaintiff. A judge has just granted a temporary freeze on all estate and Northbridge accounts based on the evidence you see on that screen." He handed the paper, the temporary restraining order, to the security guard. Not to Gavin. "Mr. Royce is currently unauthorized to access any estate resources," Elias said, "and that includes this stage." The guard looked at the order. He looked at Gavin. "I am going to have to ask you to step away from the podium, sir," the guard said. Gavin looked around the room. He looked for an ally. He looked for someone to save him, but all he saw were phones. All he saw were lenses. And then, all eyes swung to me. I was still standing there. My hands were still in my yellow rubber gloves, my name tag. Stella caught the light. "Who are you?" someone shouted from the back. "Who are you to Edmund Sterling?" "Exactly." I looked at Gavin. He was defeated. He was small. I leaned toward the mic one last time. "I am the granddaughter he refused to erase," I said. Behind me, the departures board began to flip. Clack, 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 clack. The sound was like applause. "And," I added, looking straight into the camera lens, "I am the one he wrote the integrity clause for." The silence that followed my opening statement was not empty. It was heavy, sucked dry of oxygen by the sheer weight of the image looming on the screen behind the podium. Gavin Royce had expected a montage of sunsets and container ships, a soft-focus lullaby to put the press to sleep while he picked their pockets. Instead, he got a 10-foot-tall scan of a handwritten note on cream-colored stationery. The handwriting was jagged and forceful. The ink faded to a sepia tone, but the words were legible enough to be read from the back of the concourse. "To my daughter Diane and her living issue." The note read, "Blood does not wash off, no matter how far you swim." Beside the note was the photograph, the real one, the one Elias had pulled from the false bottom of the desk. My mother, 19 years old and laughing in the wind, holding a toddler with messy hair and a birthmark on her collarbone. The Sterling Oceanic terminal ship rose behind us like a steel mountain. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. It started from the front row where the reporters sat and rolled backward to the travelers standing by the Hudson newsstand. It was the sound of a narrative snapping in half. "What is this?" Gavin hissed, his voice tight and strangled. He turned toward the screen, his face bathed in the harsh white light of the projector. "This is not the approved media. This is unauthorized personal property." "It is evidence," I said into the microphone. My voice was surprisingly steady. My hands were gripping the cold metal of the cart handle, but my voice did not shake. "And we are just getting started." I pressed the button on the remote again. The screen split down the middle. On the left side, a document labeled Exhibit A, verified signature of Diane Sterling, Department of Motor Vehicles, 1999. It showed my mother's signature bold, looping, aggressive. On the right side, a document labeled Exhibit B, Deed of Renunciation, 2010. It showed the signature that had erased me. It was shaky, tentative. An animated red circle appeared around the capital letter S on the right side document. "If you look at the screen," I said, guiding the audience like I was giving a safety demonstration, "you will see a distinct mechanical hook at the top of the capital S on the right. That hook does not appear in the natural sample on the left. That hook is a hesitation mark. It is what happens when a hand pauses to check the shape of a letter it is not used to writing." "This is absurd," Gavin shouted, trying to wave his hands in front of the projector beam, casting a frantic, flailing shadow over the evidence. "This is amateur conspiracy theory. You are a janitor. You are not a forensic expert." "I am not," I agreed calmly. "But Arthur Penhaligon is. He is the forensic document examiner who prepared this analysis. And he is prepared to testify that the signature engaging the renunciation of the Sterling estate is a forgery." I clicked the button again. The crowd was not looking at Gavin anymore. They were glued to the screen. The slide changed to a complex flowchart, the kind Maria, the forensic accountant, had drawn on the whiteboard in Harborview, but here, blown up to the size of a billboard, it looked like an autopsy of a crime. For 15 years, I narrated. We were told that the Sterling estate was in a blind trust. We were told it was being managed for future philanthropic endeavors, but the bank statements from Northbridge trustees tell a different story. The screen flashed with rows of data. I had highlighted the relevant numbers in bright yellow. January 2015, I read aloud. Management fee transfer to Consulting Group Alpha $15,000. Consulting Group Alpha is a shell company registered to a post office box in the Cayman Islands. February 2015, I continued, the rhythm of the numbers hitting like punches. Retainer fee transfer $12,000. Discretionary spending $8,000. Gavin was shaking his head, his face flushing a deep, ugly crimson. These are standard administrative costs. This is libel. I will have you sued for every penny you will ever make. You cannot sue me for reading your own bank statements. Gavin, I said. I clicked the button one more time. And this, I said, my voice dropping an octave, is my favorite receipt. The screen cleared. A single image appeared. It was a carbon copy of a cashier's check. It was sharp, clear, and damning. Pay to the order of Prestige Motors of Ashford. Amount $38,000.00. Memo vehicle purchase. J. Sterling. Drawn on account Northbridge Trustees, LLC. Estate Operating Fund. A murmur of shock went through the room. A convertible. A luxury car for a college student. Paid for by the estate of a man who supposedly had no heirs. That check, I said, pointing to the screen. Paid for a red convertible given to my sister, Jenna Sterling, for her graduation. It was paid for by the estate funds that Mr. Royce claims to be protecting. He told my mother it was a scholarship prize. He told the IRS it was a business expense, but the check says J. Sterling. I looked directly at Gavin. He was sweating now, visible beads of perspiration rolling down his temple. Tell me, Gavin, I asked. If Diane Sterling has no living issue, as you filed in court, then who is J. Sterling? The reporters in the front row lifted their phones in unison. It looked like a salute. The QR code, I commanded. Now, the screen shifted to the final slide. The massive, complex black and white square filled the display. If you scan this code, I told the room, you will be taken directly to the Harborview Superior Court website. You will find a time-stamped copy of the civil complaint filed at 9 o'clock this morning. Stella Henderson versus Gavin Royce and Northbridge Trustees, LLC. It is live, a reporter from the Metro Daily shouted from the second row, scrolling frantically on his phone. The docket is active. Case number 49221. That was the match in the powder keg. Gavin Royce exploded. The veneer of the polished executive cracked and fell away, revealing the desperate, cornered thief beneath. He let out a roar of inarticulate rage. Hijacked, he screamed, his voice cracking. This event has been hijacked. This is a coordinated attack. She is lying. He lunged. He did not call for security this time. He moved himself. He vaulted off the low stage, his expensive Italian loafers skidding on the polished floor. He was coming straight for me. His eyes were wide and wild, his hands reaching out as if he wanted to strangle the words right out of my throat. You bitter little janitor, he shrieked, spitting the words. You think you can ruin me? You are nothing. You are chasing lottery tickets. I did not move. I did not flinch. I stood behind my cart, gripping the handle. I had faced down drunk passengers and angry travelers for 5 years. A man in a suit did not scare me, but he never reached me. 2 large figures in blue uniforms stepped into his path. It was the airport security team. They moved with the heavy, practiced efficiency of men who spent their days stopping people from running through checkpoints. Sir, the lead officer barked, planting a hand firmly on Gavin's chest. Step back. You are causing a disruption in a secure area. Get out of my way, Gavin shouted, trying to push past the officer. That woman is a criminal. She is slandering me. Sir, step back immediately or you will be detained, the officer warned, his hand moving to the taser on his belt. Gavin stumbled back, his chest heaving. He looked around the room, searching for an exit, searching for control, but the room had turned against him. The cameras that had been set up to capture his glory were now zooming in on his flushed, frantic face. The flashbulbs were popping like gunfire. A woman in a sharp gray blazer stood up in the press section. I recognized her. She was the investigative reporter for the local business journal, the one Elias had tipped off specifically. "Mr. Royce?" she shouted over the commotion, her voice cutting through the noise. "Can you explain why the mailing address for Northbridge trustees listed in Exhibit C is the exact same post office box used by your personal consulting firm, Royce Lifestyle Management?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Gavin blinked, looking like he had been slapped. He stammered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. It is a matter of consolidating correspondence. It is standard industry practice for efficiency." "It means nothing." "It means commingling of funds," another reporter shouted. "Are you denying the transfers?" "I am not answering questions from a mob," Gavin yelled. "This is a setup." "It is not a setup, Gavin," a calm voice said from the back of the crowd. "It is the law." The crowd parted. Elias Marlowe stepped forward. He looked unremarkable in his gray suit, blending in with the travelers. But he walked with a quiet authority that made people step aside. He held a folded document in his hand. He did not walk to Gavin. He walked to the head of the security detail. "I am Elias Marlowe," he said, loud enough for the nearest microphone to catch. "I am the attorney representing the Sterling estate. I have here a temporary restraining order granted by Judge Halloway of the Harborview Superior Court 20 minutes ago." He handed the document to the security officer. The officer took it, scanning the judge's signature and the embossed seal. "This order," Elias explained, turning slightly so the cameras could see his face, "places an immediate freeze on all assets, accounts, and properties held by the Sterling estate and Northbridge trustees. It also specifically bars Mr. Gavin Royce from acting as an agent of the estate, accessing estate property, or entering estate-owned facilities until the hearing." Elias pointed to the stage. "That includes this podium." The camera shutters went wild. They captured the exact moment the security officer nodded, folded the order, and turned to face Gavin. It was the ultimate humiliation. The document was not even served to him. It was served to the guard who was about to kick him out. "Mr. Royce," the officer said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "I am going to have to ask you to leave the premises. Your credentials for this event are no longer valid." Gavin looked at the officer. He looked at Elias. Then he looked at me. His face crumbled. The arrogance, the power, the certainty it all dissolved. He looked small. He looked like a man who had realized, too late, that the ground he was standing on was actually a trap door. "You," he whispered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You have no idea what you have done. You have destroyed everything Edmund built." "No," I said, speaking into the microphone one last time. "I am cleaning it up." The security officers flanked him. One of them took him by the elbow, a gentle but firm grip that said, "You are going with us whether you like it or not." They began to escort him away from the departures board, away from the banner, away from the cameras. As he was led away, the concourse fell into a strange, stunned silence. The only sound was the squeak of his shoes and the distant hum of the baggage conveyors. Then, the spell broke. The reporters turned. The cameras swiveled. They were not looking at the retreating figure of the disgraced executive anymore. They were looking at me. I stood there in my scuffed non-slip shoes, my navy blue polyester pants, and my thrift store uniform shirt with the name Stella pinned to the pocket. I was holding the handle of a custodial cart that smelled of bleach and lemon. "Miss," a reporter called out. "Miss, over here." "Who are you?" a voice shouted from the back. "Who are you to Edmund Sterling?" "Exactly." I looked at the crowd. I looked at the banner hanging above me, Builder of Horizons. I thought about the silver-haired man sitting at gate D14. I thought about the camera lenses he had watched me through. I thought about the $14 an hour I had earned every night while he watched, satisfying the clause that Gavin had tried to bury. I leaned toward the microphone. The feedback hummed slightly. I let go of the microphone. I grabbed my cart. I turned around and started to push it away, the squeaky wheel singing its own song of victory. I had a shift to finish. The floor wasn't going to clean itself. The Harborview Superior Court did not smell like jet fuel and lemon polish. It smelled of old wood, floor wax, and the terrifying dryness of recycled air. Unlike the airport, where chaos was the baseline and noise was constant, this room was silent. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that pressed against your eardrums. There were no cameras here, no flashing digital boards, no travelers rushing to catch a flight. There was just the judge, the lawyers, a handful of observers, and the truth waiting to be dragged out into the light. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Elias. My hands were folded in my lap, resting on the wool fabric of a blazer I had bought at a thrift store specifically for this day. It was itchy, but Elias said I needed to look respectful. Across the aisle, Gavin Royce sat with his legal team. He looked diminished without his entourage and his microphone. His skin was a sallow gray under the courtroom lights, but his jaw was set in a line of stubborn arrogance. Gavin's attorney was a man named Harlan Beck. He was everything Elias was not: loud, flashy, and radiating a manufactured outrage that filled the room the moment he stood up. He wore a suit that shimmered slightly under the lights and moved with the aggressive energy of a man used to bullying his way to a settlement. "Your Honor," Beck boomed, striding toward the bench without waiting for an invitation. "This entire proceeding is a farce. The plaintiff is painting a picture of a lost heiress and a wicked step-uncle, but she has conveniently left out a crucial piece of paper." He whipped a document out of his briefcase with a theatrical flourish and slapped it onto the judge's bench. "This," Beck announced, turning to smirk at me, "is a revocation of renunciation. It is signed by Stella Sterling herself, dated 3 weeks ago. In this document, she attempts to reverse her mother's original decision. Now, Your Honor, one cannot revoke a renunciation unless one first acknowledges that the renunciation existed. This proves she knew about the arrangement. She is not a victim of fraud. She is just a schemer who changed her mind when she realized how much money was on the table." I felt a cold spike of panic in my chest. I had never signed such a thing. I looked at Elias. He didn't blink. He didn't even look up from his notepad. Judge Holloway, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes that looked like they could cut glass, picked up the document. She peered at it over her reading glasses. "Mr. Marlowe, do you have a response?" Elias stood up slowly. "We do, Your Honor. We anticipated Mr. Royce might try to muddy the waters with more creative writing." He signaled to the back of the room. Arthur Penhaligon, the forensic document examiner who had analyzed the hook on the S at the airport, walked forward. He set up his easel and a portable projector with the calm efficiency of a surgeon preparing for an operation. "Your Honor," Arthur said, his voice dry and academic, "I have analyzed the document Mr. Beck just presented. It is a clumsy effort, even by the standards of this case." Arthur projected a high-resolution scan of the revocation signature next to a video clip. "If you look at the signature on the document," Arthur explained, using a laser pointer to circle the slant of the letters, "you will see a distinct backward inclination. The cross on the T goes from right to left. The loops on the L open to the west. This indicates the writer is left-handed." He clicked a button. The video played. It was footage from the security camera in the lobby of Marlowe and Finch, dated 2 days prior. It showed me standing at the reception desk, signing the visitor log. I held the pen in my right hand. "The plaintiff," Arthur stated, "is dominant right-handed. The person who forged this document was left-handed. Furthermore, the forger made a critical error. They spelled Sterling with a backward S in 2 instances, a common trait of someone trying to disguise their natural handwriting by using their non-dominant hand, but failing to mirror the muscle memory correctly." Beck's face went red. He tried to snatch the document back from the bench, but Judge Holloway slammed her hand down on it. "Leave it, Mr. Beck, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. It is now evidence, and let me be clear, if I find out that your client generated this document to mislead this court, I will not just sanitize the record, I will sanitize his freedom. She turned her gaze to Gavin. He shrank into his chair, refusing to make eye contact. I have heard enough about documents, Judge Holloway said. I want to hear from the people. I understand Diane Henderson has been subpoenaed. The bailiff opened the heavy oak doors at the back of the room. My mother walked in. She looked 20 years older than she had on the day I opened the gray box. She was wearing a beige cardigan that was too big for her, clutching a tissue in one hand and the arm of a budget strip mall lawyer in the other. She walked with her head down, avoiding my eyes, avoiding Gavin's eyes, staring at the carpet as if it contained the instructions for how to breathe. She took the stand. She looked small and terrified in the witness box. Mrs. Henderson, the judge said gently but firmly, you understand you are under oath. Yes, ma'am, Diane whispered. Beck jumped up immediately. Your Honor, before we proceed, my client and Mrs. Henderson would like to request a moment for private reconciliation. This is clearly a family misunderstanding that has been blown out of proportion by aggressive litigation. We believe we can reach a settlement privately. It was a lifeline. Gavin was trying to get her off the stand before she could talk. The judge looked at me. Ms. Sterling, do you agree to a private reconciliation? I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my voice was mine. No, Your Honor, I said. I do not want reconciliation. I do not want a settlement. I want the integrity clause enforced. I want the fraud exposed, even if it means everything comes out, even if it hurts. I looked at my mother. She finally looked up at me. Her eyes filled with tears and a pleading desperation. Don't do this, her eyes said. Let's just go home. But I couldn't go home. Home was a lie. Proceed, Judge Holloway said. Elias walked to the podium. He didn't start with questions about the forgery. He started with a stack of paper that looked boring and bureaucratic. Your Honor, Elias said, handing the stack to the clerk. I would like to enter into evidence the plaintiff's pay stubs from Bright Path Facility Services for the years 2021 through 2024. He handed a second stack. And these are her tax returns for the same period. He handed a third stack. And these are the bank statements for Mr. Gavin Royce and Northbridge trustees for the corresponding months. Elias turned to the judge. The defense argues that Gavin Royce was the rightful steward of the estate because the heir was absent, but the will of Edmund Sterling contained an integrity clause. It required the heir to be self-sufficient, to work. He picked up one of my pay stubs. Week of November 12th, 2022. Elias read, 48 hours worked, gross pay $672, shift differential 50 cents an hour. He picked up a statement from Northbridge. Week of November 12th, 2022. He read, disbursement to Royce Lifestyle Management for consulting services $12,000, dinner at Le Bernardin $800, purchase of vintage wine $4,000. Elias looked at Gavin. Mr. Royce spent more on wine in one afternoon than the heir earned in a month of scrubbing floors. Judge Holloway picked up the papers. She looked at the pay stubs, the crumpled, cheap paper recording my life in hours and cents. Then she looked at the glossy bank statements. She read the integrity clause aloud from the copy of the will on her desk. The heir must be engaged in verifiable, self-sufficient labor. She lowered her glasses and looked directly at Gavin. Mr. Royce, she said, her tone sharp as a razor. Can you explain to this court how a man living off a 6-figure monthly allowance from a dead man's trust is more self-sufficient than a woman working the graveyard shift for $14 an hour? Gavin opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked like a fish gasping on a dock. The management fee is standard for, he stammered. It is standard for a leech. The judge cut him off. Not for an heir. Elias wasn't done. We have one more piece of evidence regarding the absence of the heir. Your Honor. He produced a single sheet of paper. It was an email printout. This was subpoenaed from the servers of Northbridge trustees, Elias said. It is dated 10 years ago, from Gavin Royce to his personal accountant. The room went deadly silent. Elias read the text. It was short, brutal. Diane is handled. Just keep the girl off the record. As far as the auditors are concerned, she doesn't exist. She doesn't exist. The words hung in the air. I felt tears prick my eyes. Hot and sudden. That was it. That was my life. 10 years of being invisible. Summed up in 3 words typed by a man who wanted to buy a villa. My mother let out a sob. It was a loud, wrenching sound that broke the silence. Mrs. Henderson, Elias asked, turning to her. Is that what happened? Was it handled? Diane was shaking. She gripped the railing of the witness stand. He told me, she started, her voice cracking. He told me Edmund hated me. Who told you? Elias asked gently. Gavin, she wept. Gavin came to the house right after Dad died. He told me Edmund had left a file. He said Edmund had documented every mistake I ever made. He said Edmund was going to declare me an unfit mother from the grave. She looked at me, the tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. He said Edmund's lawyers would take you away. Stella. He said they would put you in foster care because I couldn't provide for you. He said the only way to protect you, the only way to keep us together, was to disappear, to sign the papers and let him handle the money. So you signed the waivers? Elias asked. Yes, she sobbed. I signed the medical forms. I signed the power of attorney. I signed whatever he put in front of me because I was terrified they would take my baby. And the renunciation? Elias asked. Did you sign the deed of renunciation? Diane stopped crying. She sat up straighter. Her face hardened. No, she said firmly. I never signed that. I would never renounce my father's name. I hated him for leaving us. But I never renounced him. She pointed a shaking finger at Gavin across the room. He did that, she shouted, her voice rising to a scream. He forged that. He told me we were just hiding you, but he forged that paper to steal it all. He lied to me. He lied to me for 15 years. Gavin Beck leaned over and whispered frantically to Gavin. But Gavin wasn't listening. He was staring at Diane with pure hatred. The facade was gone. The family friend was gone. There was only the thief. Judge Holloway slammed her gavel down. The sound was like a gunshot. Order, she commanded. Order in this court. The room quieted, but the energy was vibrating. It was the feeling of a dam breaking. Judge Holloway looked at the pile of evidence on her bench, the pay stubs, the forgery analysis, the email. I have seen enough for today, she said. Her voice was cold, devoid of patience. I am calling a recess for 24 hours to review the totality of this evidence. She looked at Gavin Royce. Mr. Royce, she said, I am keeping the asset freeze in place, and I am issuing a warning based on the testimony regarding forgery and the email evidence presented. Criminal referrals to the district attorney's office are highly likely. Do not leave the jurisdiction. Surrender your passport to the bailiff before you walk out those doors. Your Honor, Beck protested. Passport, the judge repeated. Now. She stood up and swept out of the room, her black robes flowing behind her. The bailiff moved toward Gavin. Gavin looked at his lawyer, then at the bailiff, and slowly reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out his passport. He handed it over. It was a small gesture, but it was everything. It was the end of the Tuscany trips. It was the end of the escape route. I walked out of the courtroom with Elias. The hallway outside was cool and echoing. Through the high windows, I could see the gray sky of Harborview. Did we win? I asked, my voice quiet. Elias stopped and looked at me. He looked tired, but he smiled. We broke his defense, he said. We have the truth on the record, but it is not locked yet. Stella, he is cornered, and cornered animals are dangerous. We have to finish this. I nodded. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't relief. It was the feeling of gravity shifting. For 29 years, the weight of the world had been pushing me down. Now, for the first time, I felt like I was the one pushing back. I looked at my watch. It was 3 in the afternoon. "I have to get to the airport," I said. Elias looked surprised. "You are going back to work after this." "The judge said 24 hours, I said. "That means I have one more shift, one more night to satisfy the clause. I am not giving him an inch." Elias: "Not until the ink is dry." I buttoned my thrift store blazer and walked toward the exit. I had a plane to catch, and I had a floor to mop. The war room at the hotel suite in Harborview was a chaotic mess of legal briefs, half-eaten room service sandwiches, and coffee cups that had gone cold hours ago. The air conditioning was humming too loudly, but no one moved to turn it down. Elias Marlowe was pacing the length of the carpet, his shoes making a muffled thud, thud, thud that matched the anxious rhythm of my own heart. "We have the momentum," Elias said, running a hand through his silver hair, disrupting its perfect grooming. "We have the testimony. We have the forensic analysis of the signature, but Gavin is a cockroach. Stella. Cockroaches survive nuclear blasts. He's going to come back tomorrow with a claim that Edmund was mentally incompetent when he wrote the original will, or that the integrity clause was interpreted incorrectly. We are relying on interpretations of Edmund's intent. We need an anchor." He stopped pacing and looked at me. "We need Edmund himself, not just memos filtered through lawyers or accounts managed by trustees. We need something he touched, something he hid." "We searched the study," I said, rubbing my temples. "You said you turned that house upside down 10 years ago. You found the photo in the desk." "Edmund was paranoid," Elias muttered, more to himself than to me. "Toward the end, he didn't trust his own filing cabinets. He used to tell me that the only safe place to put something valuable was in filth." I looked up. Filth. He had this saying, Elias recalled, a small smile ghosting on his lips. He would say, "Elias, no one checks what they pay someone else to clean." He used to hide his spare safe deposit keys taped to the bottom of the garbage disposal unit in the kitchen sink. He said it was the only place Gavin wouldn't stick his manicured fingers. The sentence hit me like a physical shove. No one checks what they pay someone else to clean. I stood up slowly. My mind raced back to the blueprints of Brindle Cross International Airport. I thought about the layout of the terminals. Edmund Sterling hadn't just invested in the airport. He had been a logistics obsessive. He had helped design the freight and utility flows decades ago. He knew the guts of that building better than the architects did. "The infrastructure," I whispered. Elias turned to me. "What?" "Brindle Cross," I said, my voice gaining strength. Edmund designed the utility layout for Terminal A back in the 80s. It is the oldest part of the airport. It is the part everyone hates. The plumbing is bad, the lighting is yellow, and the freight corridors are a maze. "And," Elias prompted. "And," I said, the realization blooming into a certainty. If he was watching me work the graveyard shift, he knew exactly where I spent my time. He knew where the worst jobs were. If he wanted to hide something for the janitor heir to find, he wouldn't put it in a safety deposit box. He would put it in the one place only a janitor would ever look closely. I grabbed my bag. "I have to go back, now." "Stella, the hearing resumes in 12 hours, Elias warned. "If you leave?" "If I leave, I might find the anchor," I interrupted. "Get the jet, or book me a commercial flight. I don't care. I need to get to Terminal A before the sun comes up." The flight back to the Midwest was a blur of black coffee and nervous energy. I landed at 3 in the morning, the dead center of the graveyard shift. I didn't go to my car. I went straight to the employee locker room in the basement. The smell of the locker room was familiar stale sweat, aerosol deodorant, and damp wool. I stripped off my court clothes, the stiff blazer, the nice slacks, and pulled on my Bright Path uniform. The polyester scratched my skin, but for the first time, it felt right. It felt like a disguise that was actually a superpower, I pinned my name tag on. Stella. I went to the supply closet and grabbed my old cart. The left wheel squeaked as I rolled it out. Squeak, drag, squeak, drag. I bypassed Concourse D, the modern wing where I usually worked. I headed straight for Terminal A. Terminal A was the armpit of Brindle Cross. It was used mostly for budget airlines and overflow cargo flights. The ceilings were lower. The tiles were a cracked beige from 1985, and the air always smelled faintly of sewage and copper. This was the part of the airport the executives ignored. This was the part Gavin Royce probably hadn't set foot in since the ribbon-cutting ceremony 40 years ago. I pushed my cart into the men's restroom near Gate A3. It was notorious among the custodial staff. The swamp, we called it. It had plumbing issues that defied modern science. I locked the main door from the inside and put up the closed for maintenance sign. I wasn't here to clean. I was here to hunt. I stood in the center of the room, breathing in the smell of industrial pine cleaner masking the scent of old urine. I looked around. If I were Edmund Sterling, a billionaire who hated soft hands and easy money, where would I hide the keys to my kingdom? I checked the undersides of the sinks. Nothing but gum and rust. I checked the inside of the toilet tanks. Nothing. Then I looked at the paper towel dispenser. It was one of those massive, heavy-duty stainless steel units built into the wall. It was dented and scratched, a relic from a time when things were built to survive a bomb blast. It was huge, and it was mounted slightly crooked. I walked over to it. I ran my gloved fingers along the edge where the steel met the tile. There was a gap filled with years of gray grime that looked like grout but felt too soft. "No one checks what they pay someone else to clean," I muttered. I pulled a putty knife from my cart. I jammed it into the gap. I scraped away the hardened gunk. My knife hit something that wasn't tile and wasn't steel. It felt sticky. I dug my fingers in, ignoring the revulsion, ignoring the fact that this was the filthiest crack in the filthiest bathroom in the state. I felt plastic. I felt tape. I pulled. With a tearing sound, a small, heavy packet came loose from the dark recess behind the dispenser. It was wrapped in layers of thick black electrical tape, covered in dust and grime. I dropped it into the sink and ripped the tape open. Inside was a heavy-duty Ziploc bag, and inside that bag were two things: a strange, cylindrical key that looked like it belonged to a vending machine, and a thick plastic access card. The card was old. The laminate was peeling slightly at the corners. It was white with a red stripe. On the front, printed in block letters, it read, "Sterling Infrastructure, Tech Clearance, Level 5. My hands were shaking. I knew exactly what this was for. I grabbed the key and the card and ran out of the bathroom. I pushed my cart into the service corridor that ran behind the food court. This was a restricted area, but I had mopped it 1,000 times. No one ever stopped the janitor in the service corridor. Halfway down the hall, hidden behind a stack of unused pallets, was a metal panel set flush into the wall. It was labeled Data Node 4. Do not obstruct. Most people thought it was just a fuse box. I knew it was an original access point for the airport's hardline server system. I inserted the cylindrical key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, heavy click that sounded expensive. I swiped the card through the reader slot. The panel popped open. Inside, it wasn't just wires. It was a hollowed-out space, lined with fireproof foam. Sitting in the center of the foam was a small, silver digital safe. It was tiny, barely big enough for a sandwich, but it looked indestructible. I stared at it. There was no keypad, just a biometric scanner and a USB port. I panicked for a second. Biometric Edmund was dead. I couldn't scan his finger. Then I saw the sticky note taped to the top of the safe. The handwriting was unmistakably Edmund's, jagged and forceful. Input code. The hourly wage of a lead custodian in 1999. I almost laughed. It was a test, even from the grave. He was testing me. He wanted to know if I knew the history of the job. I didn't know the answer off the top of my head, but I knew who would. I pulled out my phone and called Brenda, the dispatch supervisor at Brightpath. It was 4 a.m. She answered on the second ring, sounding like she had been smoking a cigar. "Stella, you are supposed to be off the schedule." "Brenda, Quick question, I said, breathless. What was the starting wage for a lead custodian at Brindle Cross in '99, before the union contract changed in 2001? What kind of question is that? She grumbled. I don't know. $8.50 no. Wait, it was $8.25. I remember because I bought a pack of smokes for $2 back then. $8.25, I repeated. I typed 0825 into the small keypad that appeared when I touched the screen. The safe beeped. Access granted. The door hissed open. Inside lay a single silver USB drive. It was heavy, made of brushed aluminum. Etched into the metal was one word, integrity. Underneath the drive was a folded letter on cream stationery. I picked up the letter. My thumb brushed the embossed letterhead. From the desk of Edmund Sterling, I unfolded it. To the granddaughter. I haven't met yet. If you are reading this, it means two things. First, I am dead. Second, you found the drive. And if you found the drive, it is because you were working. You were looking in the cracks. You were cleaning up the mess. Gavin thinks power is about sitting in the boardroom. He thinks wealth is about being clean. He is wrong. Wealth is built in the dirt. It is maintained by the people who show up when the lights go out. I hid this here because I knew the soft ones would never find it. They would never touch the back of a paper towel dispenser. They would never walk down this corridor. You are not one of the soft ones. You are the point of the clause, not the victim of it. Take this to Elias. Finish the job. Granddad. I stood in the service corridor, tears streaming down my face, dripping onto my polyester uniform. For 29 years, I had felt like I was nothing, like I was the dirt I cleaned up. And here was this man, this titan of industry, telling me that the dirt was where the value was. I pocketed the drive and the letter. I slammed the panel shut. I left the cart right there in the hallway. I didn't need it anymore. I made it back to Harborview just as the sun was breaking over the Atlantic. Elias met me at the door of the hotel suite, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. Did you find it? He asked, his voice tight. I held up the silver drive. Integrity, I said. We plugged it into his secure laptop. The drive encrypted and mounted instantly. There were 3 folders. Folder 1, Original Charter. Elias opened it. It was a high-resolution scan of the original incorporation documents for Sterling Horizon. He scrolled to the bottom. Here, he pointed, his finger trembling. Article 7. Line 4. In the event of my incapacitation or death, the automatic secondary heirs shall be the living issue of Diane Sterling, regardless of her marital status or estrangement. It is notarized. It predates the trust formation by 20 years. This proves the trust Gavin set up was illegal from day one. He couldn't divert the assets because the charter forbade it. Folder 2, the Brindle Cross Journals. These were PDFs of handwritten journals. Page after page of Edmund's notes about the airport. Tuesday, Octa 4, watch the girl on camera 4. She fixed the wheel on her cart with duct tape instead of asking for a new one. Resourceful. She reminds me of Diane before the fear took over. He was watching, I whispered. He really was watching. Folder 3, video message. Elias clicked the file. A video player opened. The screen filled with the face of Edmund Sterling. He was sitting in his study, the same room where Elias had found the photo. He looked old, his face lined like a road map, but his blue eyes were sharp and alive. He looked right into the camera lens. He looked right at me. Hello, Stella, Edmund said. His voice was gravelly and deep, the voice of a man who had spent his life shouting over ship engines. If you are watching this, it means Gavin tried to steal it. I knew he would. He is a weak man, and weak men are always thieves. He leaned forward. I set up the integrity clause not to keep you out, but to keep him out. I needed to make sure that when you took over, you understood the weight of it. I needed to know you could carry the load. I watched you work, Stella. I watched you take care of your family when they didn't deserve it. I watched you survive. He paused, and for a second, his eyes softened. The clause isn't a hoop for you to jump through. It is a greeting. It is my way of shaking your hand. You have earned this, not because of your blood, but because of your sweat." He smiled, a crooked, tough smile. "If you are watching this, you don't need a test. You don't need permission. Just go to work." The video cut to black. The room was silent. Elias sat back in his chair, exhaling a breath he seemed to have been holding for a decade. "That is it," Elias said quietly. "That is the nail in the coffin." He started typing furiously. "What are you doing?" I asked, wiping my eyes. "I am hashing this drive," he said. "I am logging the chain of custody, and I am filing an emergency motion to submit new evidence. We are asking the judge to unseal this immediately. We are not waiting for the hearing to start. We are going to drop this on the judge's desk before Gavin even finishes his morning coffee." He looked up at me. "Gavin is going to walk into that courtroom thinking he can spin a story about a revocation," Elias said. "He has no idea that Edmund is about to testify from the grave." I touched the silver drive. It was cold, but it felt like burning coal. "Let's go," I said. "I want to see his face when he hears Edmund's voice." Elias hit send on the filing. "The motion is filed," he said. "The judge has it, the clerk has it, and in about 5 minutes, Gavin's lawyer is going to get a notification that will make him wish he had never taken this case." We stood up. I was still wearing my polyester uniform. I had forgotten to change. "Do you want to change?" Elias asked, gesturing to the bathroom. I looked down at the navy blue shirt. I looked at the stain on the sleeve from the service corridor. I looked at the name tag. "No," I said. "Edmund said he wanted a worker. I am going to court dressed like one." Gavin Royce did not go quietly. He went loudly, expensively, and with the desperate stupidity of a man who believes he can shout louder than the truth. In the 24 hours before the final hearing, while I was sitting in a hotel room trying to process the fact that my grandfather had loved me from afar, Gavin launched a public relations blitz that defied logic. He burned through what remained of his personal liquidity to plaster the internet with banner ads. Royce Management. They screamed in bold navy font, honoring the sterling legacy, stability, trust, future. But he did not stop at the internet. In a move that Elias called suicidal arrogance, Gavin bought ad space on the digital displays at Brindle Cross International Airport. I saw the photos Elias's paralegal sent us, there. On the beautiful new LED screens in the main atrium screens paid for by the estate he was stealing from, was Gavin's face, looking visionary and confident, superimposed over a fleet of sterling ships. It was a violation of the asset freeze. It was a violation of the restraining order. It was real-time securities fraud broadcast to thousands of travelers. "He is trying to convince the market he is still in charge," Elias said, saving the screenshots into a folder labeled Exhibit H. "He thinks if he looks like the CEO, the judge will be afraid to remove him. He is digging his own grave, and he is billing the estate for the shovel." Before the court reconvened, I had one meeting left. It was not with a lawyer. It was with my mother. We met in the public arrival area of the airport, near the baggage claim. Diane looked different today. She was not wearing the oversized cardigan or the fearful expression she had worn on the witness stand. She looked tired. Yes, but the frantic, hunted look was gone. She was holding a small, creased piece of paper. "I found this," she said, her voice steady. "I kept it, for 20 years. I kept it tucked inside my jewelry box, under the velvet lining. Gavin told me to burn everything Edmund ever sent, but I couldn't burn this." She handed it to me. It was a letter from Edmund, dated 2 decades ago. The stationery was cream-colored, identical to the note I had found in the safe. I read the jagged, forceful handwriting. "Diane, stop punishing yourself. You made a mistake with the boy, but you are not a mistake. Bring my granddaughter home. The harbor is lonely without noise." I looked up at her, my vision blurring. "He wanted us back." "He did," Diane whispered. "But Gavin told me the letter was a trap. He said home meant court. He said noise meant screaming. He twisted every word until I was too scared to read them anymore. She reached out and touched my arm. Her hand was warm. I am sorry I was weak, Stella. I am so sorry I let him become the narrator of our lives. You are not weak, I said, putting the letter in my pocket next to the USB drive. And he is done narrating. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed. It was Elias, but when I answered, he didn't speak. He just played a recording. It was a phone call that had taken place 10 minutes ago. It was Jenna. I cannot do that. Gavin. Jenna's voice was shaking but clear. I am not calling her. Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat. Gavin's voice roared through the speaker, distorted by rage. You are driving a $38,000 convertible that I paid for. You are going to a university that I pay for, that makes you an accessory to fraud. Unless you fix this. You call your sister. You tell her to drop the suit. You tell her she is ruining the family. If you don't, I will make sure you are named in the indictment right alongside your mother. I am recording this, Jenna said. Her voice broke, but she finished the sentence. I am recording this, and I am sending it to Elias Marlowe. The recording ended with the sound of Gavin screaming an obscenity before the line went dead. Elias came back on the line. He just threatened a witness. He just attempted to extort a college student. We have him. Stella, we have him cold. 10 minutes later, Harlan Beck, Gavin's lawyer, called Elias. His tone had lost all its theatrical bluster. He sounded exhausted. We have a proposal, Beck said. A 50-50 split of the estate. Gavin steps down as trustee but retains a seat on the board. We seal the record. Strict non-disclosure agreements for everyone. No criminal referrals. Everyone walks away rich. Everyone saves face. Elias looked at me. It is a guaranteed $450 million, Stella. And it is over today. No more fighting. I looked out the window at the tarmac. I saw a bright yellow Bright Path truck driving toward a plane. I saw a figure in a Navy uniform tossing luggage. I thought about the silver-haired man sitting at gate D14, watching me work, waiting for me to be strong enough to fight back. I do not want quiet money, I said into the speakerphone. I want the record corrected. No deal, Elias told Beck. We will see you in court. The courtroom was packed. The overflow seating was full. Reporters were lining the back walls. The story of the janitor heiress had gone viral, and everyone wanted to see the ending. Judge Holloway entered. She looked like a storm front moving in. She did not look at the lawyers. She looked at the screen set up in the center of the room. Mr. Marlowe, she said. I understand you have submitted a motion to introduce new evidence discovered in the last 12 hours. Yes, Your Honor, Elias said. We have a video deposition from the testator himself. Gavin sat at the defense table, his face pale and sweaty. When he heard the words, testator himself, he flinched as if he had been struck. Elias pressed play. The room filled with the gravelly, deep voice of Edmund Sterling. On the screen, my grandfather sat in his study, looking straight into the soul of everyone watching. Hello, Stella, Edmund said. Gavin let out a small, involuntary whimper. If you are watching this, it means Gavin tried to steal it, Edmund continued. I knew he would. He is a weak man, and weak men are always thieves. The reporters were typing furiously. I set up the integrity clause not to keep you out, but to keep him out, Edmund said. I watched you work, Stella. You are a worker, not a taker. The clause isn't a hoop. It is a greeting. If you are watching this, you don't need a test. Just go to work. The video ended. The silence in the room was absolute. Elias stepped forward. Your Honor, that drive also contained the original corporate charter for Sterling Horizon. It explicitly names any living child of Diane Sterling as the automatic secondary heir. The trust structure Mr. Royce created 15 years ago was not just unethical. It was legally incompatible with the founding documents of the company. He did not manage the estate. He hijacked it. And we have one final piece of evidence regarding Mr. Royce's character, Elias said. He played the call from Jenna. Gavin's voice filled the room, screaming at a 21-year-old girl, threatening her with prison, calling her an accessory. It was ugly. It was raw. It stripped away the last shred of his benevolent uncle mask. My mother took the stand one last time. She sat tall. "Mrs. Henderson," the judge asked, "did you sign a renunciation?" "No," Diane said, her voice clear. "I signed out of fear. Gavin told me my father hated us, but I know now that was a lie. Fear kept me away." "Your Honor." "Not Edmund." Judge Holloway nodded. She stacked her papers. She took a sip of water. She looked at Gavin Royce, who was now staring at the table, defeated. "Mr. Royce," Judge Holloway began, her voice ringing like a bell. "In my 20 years on the bench, I have seen greed, I have seen fraud, but I have rarely seen such a systematic, malicious dismantling of a family for personal gain." She began to list his sins. Each one felt like a nail being driven into wood. "You forged a deed of renunciation. You fabricated a death affidavit to erase a living heir. You misappropriated millions of dollars in estate funds for personal luxury. You violated my temporary restraining order with your advertising campaign this morning. And as we just heard, you engaged in witness intimidation and extortion against a young woman." Gavin did not move. "The court finds that the integrity clause has been fully satisfied by the plaintiff," the judge ruled. "The court finds that the management trust is invalid and dissolved effective immediately." She looked at me. "I rule that Stella Henderson, who has petitioned to restore her legal name to Stella Sterling, is the sole, rightful heir to the estate of Edmund Sterling. All assets, including Sterling Horizon Logistics and all subsidiary holdings, revert to her control immediately." She turned back to Gavin. "Furthermore, I am referring the entire case file, including the evidence of forgery and extortion, to the district attorney for immediate criminal prosecution. Bailiffs, take Mr. Royce into custody." The gavel cracked down. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Gavin stood up slowly. He didn't fight this time. He didn't scream. He let the bailiffs turn him around and cuff his hands behind his back. As they led him out, he looked back at me one last time. He didn't look angry anymore. He just looked empty. Elias didn't celebrate. He simply pulled out his phone and tapped a notification. "Watch," he whispered to me. I closed my eyes and imagined it, halfway across the country, in the bustling atrium of Brindle Cross International Airport. The digital boards were changing. The slick, navy blue ads for Royce Management blinked off. The face of the man who had erased me vanished. For a second, the screens went stark white, blindingly bright, catching the attention of every traveler rolling a suitcase. Then, the old logo appeared, the stylized S of Sterling Horizon, rugged and industrial. Beneath it, new text rolled out in bold black letters, the Edmund and Stella Sterling Foundation, for those who show up. And at the very bottom, on the same LED board that used to list the flights I cleaned up after, a final line appeared. It wasn't a flight number, it wasn't a destination, it was a declaration. Primary beneficiary, Stella Sterling, active employee, Brindle Cross Airport, in the courtroom. The noise of the reporters shouting questions rose like a tide. People were clapping. My mother was crying, holding Jenna's hand in the gallery. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my Bright Path ID card. It was cracked plastic, hanging on a cheap retractable lanyard. The photo showed me looking tired, with messy hair and a uniform that was too big. I placed it on the mahogany table, right next to the official court order bearing my new name, Stella Sterling. I looked at the ID. I looked at the order. For 29 years, I had been invisible. I had been the scaffolding. I had been the ghost in the background of the family photo. I took a deep breath. The air in the courtroom didn't smell like bleach anymore. It smelled like justice. I wasn't invisible anymore. The world had to see me now. Thank you so much for listening to Stella's story. If you enjoyed this journey from the night shift to the boardroom, please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from today. I would love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button to help more people hear the truth.